Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Jack Whitman. I'm 34 years old. This happened in late October of 2024. During a week I'd planned to spend alone, well, almost alone, I had my German Shepherd Rex, in Stevens State Forest near Lucas, Iowa. I wasn't a military veteran or any kind of skilled outdoorsman. I was just a freelance copy editor, tired of city life and heartbreak. After a nasty breakup and relentless burnout, I craved solitude to recenter myself in nature. If I could turn back time, I'd burn my camping gear before I ever set foot in those woods. I arrived on an overcast Wednesday afternoon. The drive from my apartment in Des Moines took about an hour and a half down the highways, then another 20 minutes on winding rural roads. By the time I reached the forest's outskirts, it felt like entering another world. There were miles of silent trees. Everything seemed hushed, as if even the birds had gone shy. Normally, these glimpses of unspoiled forest would have been exactly the tranquility I longed for, but the hush felt charged, thick with some undercurrent I couldn't name. Rex, my 6-year-old German Shepherd, paced in the back seat. He was usually good with car rides, but about 10 miles from the campsite, he whined. That low whimper in his throat made me uneasy. I tried to reassure him. "It's all good, buddy, just some new smells." But deep down, I felt the same tension. The place was different, though it looked like any typical Iowa forest. Tall oaks, the occasional maple, a thick tangle of brush beyond the neat cut of the trail. We pulled up to a designated campsite first, but I wanted something more remote. With a glance at the map, I saw a spur road leading to a less frequented clearing. It promised a primitive site. No toilets, no water, just a patch of ground. Perfect. Rex barked once as I parked, which I took as excitement. Turned out it was more warning than anything else. I set up my tent in a small clearing. The day was warm for late October, a bit muggy with a gray sky. The canopy overhead filtered the waning light, so twilight came early. I tried lighting a campfire before sundown. The wood, collected from nearby deadfall, was surprisingly damp. That wasn't weird on its own. Maybe it had rained recently, but the flame sparked green for a moment before sputtering out. I checked the wood, sniffing for chemicals. Nothing. The second time I tried, I added a little camping stove fuel to help. The fire took, though the flame was smaller than I expected. I tried not to let it get to me. I needed to relax. I pulled out my phone to record a little voice memo, something I often did to keep a journal of my travels. The battery icon flashed from 78% to 0. I swore under my breath. My phone abruptly died. No big deal, I thought. I had a backup battery, but that battery's light wouldn't come on either. Weird. I chalked it up to a fluke, maybe a loose wire inside the backup or a glitch. I reminded myself that a digital detox was part of the plan, but it did leave me feeling strangely naked, cut off from the outside. A bit of adrenaline spiked as I realized how alone we were, with no phone to call for help. Rex started whining again. The sun was nearly gone, a muted gray disk behind thick clouds. "Easy, buddy," I said, patting him. He'd been such a good dog over the years. Loyal, protective, always the first to sense danger. This time, his hackles stood on end, and he stared into the darkening tree line. I heard nothing, saw nothing, but Rex's posture said otherwise. "He's just adjusting," I told myself. I fed him, made a freeze-dried meal for me, and tried to enjoy the quiet as night fully descended. The firelight flickered on my gear, and I mentally checked off tomorrow's plan. Short hike, maybe a little journaling, Definitely some photography if I could get my phone or camera to work. Then the fire died. It was abrupt. 1 minute it crackled, the next it simply winked out. Just a hiss of smoke. It wasn't windy, and the night wasn't damp enough to smother a well-built fire. I frowned and tried to relight it with my lighter. No luck. The wood was still warm, the embers glowing faintly, but no flame would catch. That uneasy feeling seeped back. I retreated into the tent, zipped it up, and let Rex curl up near my feet. The forest was so dark that my eyes struggled to adjust. Beyond the thin fabric of the tent, there was only blackness. I listened for nocturnal animals, raccoons, owls, coyotes maybe. There was nothing. Not a single chirp. Usually, nights in the woods teem with the hum of insects, frogs, or rustling leaves. Here, it was silent as a tomb. Sometime around midnight, I awoke to Rex snarling. Not a bark, but a deep, savage snarl. I'd never quite heard from him before. My heart pounded as I unzipped the tent's door just enough to peek out with a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, showing nothing but still trees and the faint shimmer of dew on the grass. Slowly, Rex's snarls faded into a low growl. I waited, body tense, but saw no movement. Eventually, I coaxed Rex back in and zipped us up again. The adrenaline kept me awake for a good while, and I drifted off near dawn. When the morning light crept through, I realized I'd overslept. Usually, the sun in a tent wakes me early, but it was already close to 8. I noticed my sleeping bag was pooled around my ankles, unzipped. I blinked, confused. I remembered zipping it all the way to my chin. A minor detail, but it nagged at me. Outside, the ashes of last night's fire had scattered in a perfect circle, as if swept by a broom. My boots, which I'd left near the tent flap, were now 10 feet away, set neatly side by side in the grass. Rex was pacing again, his ears pinned back. Everything about this morning felt subtly wrong. I tried to shrug it off. "Let's go for a walk, buddy," I said, hooking his leash. I preferred letting him run around leash-free in safe areas, but the uneasy vibe made me want to keep him close. The plan was to find a vantage point or an official trail marker. The road here was more of an old logging path, overgrown and rutted, but it should have linked to a main trail eventually. Instead, after maybe 15 minutes of walking, the path seemed to vanish. I checked my paper map, which I'd stuffed in my jacket. The map said we should cross a creek by now, but we hadn't. I looked around. Dense forest in all directions. Not a single sign or marker. My compass, an old reliable one from my dad, spun. The needle would pause, pointing north, then waver like it couldn't decide. I rubbed it on my sleeve, tapped it, nothing changed. The forest itself was unnerving. So quiet that every step we took sounded like an explosion of crunching leaves. Over the next hour, I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but whenever I stopped, the sound stopped too. My mind soared with possibilities. Deer following at a distance, or a local property owner curious about us. But why wouldn't they call out? Eventually, I found a trickle of water that might have been the creek. It was more like a line of muddy puddles than a flow. I recognized none of the surroundings from any map I'd studied. I began to wonder if I'd misunderstood the forest boundaries or taken the wrong path. Still, I tried to keep calm, marking a few trees with orange ribbon I'd brought for just this scenario. I carefully tied the ribbons every 50 paces so I could find my way back if needed. Yet something made me uneasy. It almost felt too easy to get lost here, like the forest itself was moving, realigning. I tried to banish such silly thoughts. By midday, I was starving, so we headed back to the campsite. I followed the ribbons, though the route seemed shorter. Where it took an hour out, it took maybe 20 minutes back. That in itself was odd. At camp, my tent was exactly as I left it, but my cooler was open, and the ice was melted into a sticky pool. My bottled water was rancid, a greenish tinge inside, all of it overnight. Food wrappers felt slimy. I cursed under my breath. I'd have to be careful with water resources. I had water purification tablets, but those wouldn't fix rotting plastic jugs. The dryness in my mouth felt ominous. Sitting in my camp chair trying to salvage some of the less tainted food, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around to see a man stepping into my clearing with a raised hand and a friendly grin. He was in his early 40s, wearing worn camo pants, a flannel shirt, and a battered baseball cap. His face was tanned like someone who spent all day outside. He also carried a hunting knife in a sheath at his belt. "Whoa, easy there," the stranger said when he saw my startled expression. "Didn't mean to spook you." His voice had a raspy edge, like a heavy smoker's. "Name's Zeke Lambert. I'm sort of wandering these parts." I exhaled, relieved, yet still on guard. "Jack Whitman. You're, camping here too?" He nodded. "Yeah, came down a few days ago. I was hoping to spend some time off-grid, but..." He shrugged. "Things been weird here, man. You notice it?" Rex stood between me and Zeke, watchful. Usually, Rex is friendly with strangers, but he growled, hackles raised. I tried to calm him. Zeke eyed him warily, but didn't back away. I took that as a sign of confidence, or ignorance. Something about Zeke seemed ruggedly competent, like someone who might handle a black bear with a stern look. I invited him to sit. "You're telling me," I said, gesturing at the cooler. "My phone died out here, my water went bad, can't keep a fire lit." He nodded solemnly. "I came here with my dog, Lucy, but she took off last night chasing something in the woods. Can't find her." He stared into the distance. "Figured I'd try to come your way. Any chance you've seen a black lab? She's got a red collar." I shook my head. "Sorry, no. But if you need help looking, I've got time." Zeke appreciated the offer. We talked for a while, exchanging stories about the creeping oddities. He said he heard whispering voices near his campsite at night. The footsteps in the darkness. That uneasy feeling of being watched. He'd found strange footprints in the mud, like a person's, but with long, tapered toes. I felt a chill. Could be a joke, I thought, but his eyes told me he was genuine. We decided to stick together for the next couple of days, safety in numbers. That evening, we cooked a small meal over the new fire we built together. Having someone else around lightened my anxiety. Rex still wouldn't warm up to Zeke, though. He sat by my side, occasionally looking into the tree line with that intense concentration. The conversation with Zeke drifted from personal backgrounds to unsettling anecdotes. He told me about a deer he'd come across that stared at him, unafraid. "Swear it tried to speak, man," he said, shaking his head. Sounded like garbled human speech. Then it dashed off. I let out a nervous laugh, but I knew there was truth in his eyes. Night came quickly, as if the sun had just dropped. The day before, I'd found that sleeping in a tent felt claustrophobic in this place, so Zeke and I stayed up by the campfire a while. Eventually, we crawled into our separate tents. The wind picked up after midnight, rattling branches overhead. At one point, I heard Zeke muttering. I guessed he was having a nightmare, but the voice sounded off, deeper, layered. I tried to block it out and eventually managed to fall asleep. In the morning, Zeke's tent was empty. I called his name, no response. Rex sniffed around, tracking, but never found a solid lead. The only sign Zeke had been there was his burnt-out campfire, some leftover gear, and footprints leading into the woods. I checked those footprints. After a few yards, they merged with other tracks, just as large, but twisted somehow. I got that same sense that I was dealing with a person with elongated toes. Something primal tugged at me, a deep fear that wouldn't let go. All day I wandered, calling for Zeke. I even tried to find the campsite he mentioned for clues about his dog. I came across empty bottles, a shredded sleeping bag snagged on a branch, but no sign of Zeke. Late afternoon, I stumbled upon a bizarre clearing where I found another tent, partially collapsed. The site was littered with scraps of clothing, half buried in the dirt. The worst part, a small makeshift grave marker, a wooden cross stuck in the ground with no name. At least, that's what it looked like. I got the worst feeling in my gut, like stepping onto a murder scene. I hurried back before dark, following the ribbons I placed. Half of them were missing. The rest scratched or torn as if something clawed them off. My sense of direction was shot. The sky, covered in thick, dark clouds, gave no hint of the sun's position. By the time I returned to my own camp, I was drenched in cold sweat. I found Rex pacing around, whimpering. He'd stayed behind, presumably for safety, but seemed agitated. Nothing at the site looked disturbed at first glance. Then I saw it. The fly to my tent wide open, my sleeping bag laid out on the ground next to it, unzipped. The inside of the tent reeked like rotten eggs. Every nerve in my body told me to pack up and leave. But it was close to sundown already, and trying to navigate these roads in pitch dark with no phone felt even more suicidal. I decided to wait until morning. I still had the car, after all, about 50 yards away. I threw my gear in the tent, zipped it up, and set to making a fire. That might have been my single biggest mistake. The wood smoked, but refused to catch. I tried the scraps of my remaining stove fuel, still nothing but a weak flicker. Finally, I got a small, sullen flame going. I cooked the last of my decent food, some freeze-dried macaroni, and fed Rex. The forest had that same oppressive silence. I could hear my heartbeat, my swallowing, every rustle of clothing. Somehow, even that faint flame felt defiant, as though the darkness wanted to swallow it whole. Around midnight, a sound made my heart lurch. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. They circled my campsite. Rex rose, snarling, ears pinned back. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent. The beam caught movement near a tree. "Zeke?" I called. For a split second, I thought it was him. Same build, same clothes. But something about the face was wrong. The eyes reflected light like an animal's, bright and pale, no pupil. Its mouth was parted in what might have been a grin. I could see teeth, they seemed too long in front. "Hello?" I tried again, trembling. The figure took a step forward. It had Zeke's baseball cap, Zeke's flannel, but the skin on its face was too pale in the flashlight glow, almost translucent. As it pressed closer, I saw a black stain around its neck, like a collar of old blood. Then it whispered something in a layered voice. "Ja-ak." The sound made my skull vibrate. In terror, I fumbled backward, Rex lunging with a fierce bark. But the figure retreated into the darkness with an impossible speed, a blur of shifting limbs. Within seconds, it vanished among the trees. The only evidence it had been there was my heart hammering in my chest. I scrambled back into the tent, grabbing a hunting knife from my pack. I barely slept, if at all, for the rest of the night. Each time I nodded off, I jolted awake at the faintest crackle of leaves. Come dawn, I unzipped the tent, desperate to pack up and get out. That's when I saw my cooler stand had been toppled. The melted ice turned thick and green again. My boots, left neatly outside, were now filled with dirt. Rex whimpered near the tree line as if he had found something. I went over and saw a single human footprint pressed into the mud, larger than mine, with elongated toes. My stomach churned. I didn't bother with breakfast. I just jammed all my gear into the trunk, tore down the tent half-assed, and got behind the wheel. Rex hopped in next to me. I turned the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, died. I tried again, nothing. My gas gauge read half a tank. The battery was new, but it refused to turn over. Checking under the hood didn't help. I'm no mechanic, but everything looked intact. Another wave of dread rolled through me. I was stuck here unless I walked the forest roads. The main entrance might have been 10 miles away, maybe more. I suddenly regretted going so deep. "Okay, buddy," I whispered to Rex, swallowing the lump in my throat. "We'll just walk. We can do this." I filled a backpack with what little water and food remained salvageable. The rest smelled foul. We set off in the direction of the forest road I'd driven in on. The morning was cloudy, a dull gray. The walk felt longer than the drive, the roads more rutted than I recalled. At times, the path seemed to shift into random trails, forcing me to double back. I tried to remain calm, but the sense of disorientation was overwhelming. Every few minutes, Rex pricked his ears at some unseen threat, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. We saw no other campers, no rangers, no sign of civilization. By midday, my feet ached, and we were no closer to an exit. We reached a clearing that I swore was the same place I'd camped the first night, but my tent was gone. Instead, there was a circle of charred ground with strange footprints. My skin crawled at the familiarity. The forest was twisting reality around me. Checking my watch for the umpteenth time, I realized it was stuck. The second hand jerked back and forth like it, too, couldn't decide what time it was. Then, in that silent stretch of day, I heard a dog's bark. Not Rex, someone else. "Lucy?" I thought. Recalling Zeke's lab, I followed the sound, weaving between trees until the bark became clearer. Or maybe I was just imagining it. Eventually, I spotted the silhouette of a black dog in a ravine below. It definitely wore a red collar. The dog was still, staring up at me. I whistled softly, hoping to coax it. The dog barked once, then vanished behind a fallen log. Rex barked in return, ears perked. "Zeke's dog," I murmured, adrenaline spiking. If Lucy was alive, maybe Zeke was too. Carefully, we made our way down to the ravine. The smell of decay hung in the air. Wet leaves, old rot. The sweet stench of something gone bad. I found tracks and fur, but no dog. Then I heard a voice behind me. "Jack, down here." It was Zeke's voice. I spun around, scanning. There he stood, about 20 yards away next to a tree. His posture was rigid, his eyes wide. He wasn't wearing his cap. His hair was matted to his forehead, and there were dark streaks on his cheeks. "Zeke," I cried, relief flooding me. Rex growled, though, refusing to move closer. Zeke's voice was oddly flat. "I got lost," he said. "Can you help me get back?" "Of course. Are you okay?" I approached, but kept a hand on Rex's leash. The dog strained away as if he wanted me to keep my distance. Zeke nodded slowly. "Yeah, just cold, hungry." His smile was too wide. Something about his eyes felt out of focus. His pupils were the color of tarnished silver. Still, I couldn't leave him. So I stepped closer, and in the dim light, I noticed a ragged tear across the back of his flannel. The skin beneath looked raw. A creeping sensation prickled my scalp. He lifted his right hand toward me, palm up. His fingernails were blackened, broken. "Come on, Jack, don't leave me out here." His tone was almost pleading. I moved to take his hand, but Rex snarled viciously. That's when Zeke's smile quivered, and the corners of his mouth curled unnaturally high, revealing teeth that looked too pointed. With eerie slowness, he blinked. A single blink that took a full second, like an old marionette. Then he spoke, but two voices overlapped. One was Zeke's, the other was deeper, resonant, inhuman. "You said you'd help me," it rasped. My throat tightened. I staggered backward. Zeke stepped forward. I realized his left arm hung limp at his side as though dislocated. "What happened to you?" I whispered. He let out a laugh, a wet, choking sound. Then he hunched, shoulders jerking, as if something beneath his skin was shifting. "Lucy's with me now," he said, voice echoing. "She's safe." Instinct overrode logic. I jerked Rex's leash, turned, and ran. The immediate shame I felt at leaving a man behind was overshadowed by raw terror. I heard a hissing sound behind me and the frantic patter of footsteps. But I didn't dare look back. Branches whipped my face. The ground was slick with the decaying leaves. I sprinted until my lungs burned, ignoring the jolts of pain in my ankles, hearing only my pulse. Finally, I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Only the still, silent forest. Rex panted, a snarl still in his throat. I slowed to a shaky walk, scanning for a place to hide or regroup. On a whim, I zigzagged through a stand of pines until I found a small hollow beneath the roots of a toppled tree. I crawled in with Rex, hugging him close, trying to still my frantic breathing. For a long stretch, I heard nothing. Maybe we lost him. I corrected. Whatever that was, it wasn't Zeke. But the forest wasn't letting go of us. My watch read 2 p.m. one moment, then 11:47 a.m. the next. Time seemed fluid. Eventually, I mustered the nerve to move again, determined to find the road. We crept through the trees, stepping lightly. Every so often, I'd see a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, but it vanished when I turned. Twice, the day seemed to shift into dusk without transition, only for the sunlight to return moments later. I felt nauseated, dizzy. My sense of reality was fracturing. The next place we stumbled upon was a shallow pit, maybe 8 feet across. The smell was horrible, worse than roadkill, and thousands of flies buzzed around it. I froze at the edge. Inside the pit lay sleeping bags. At least a dozen, in various states of decay, some shredded to reveal bones. Human bones, picked clean. My stomach lurched, and I collapsed to my knees, retching. Rex whined, backing away. That was enough to confirm this was no illusion. Right on top of the jumbled mess was a brand new bag, unzipped from the inside. The color was a bright orange. I recognized it because Zeke had carried a bright orange bag. Something inside it squirmed. I couldn't look longer. I tore myself away, mind spinning. So many victims. I wondered if the entire forest was some hideous trap. Maybe I'd wandered into an old graveyard for unsolved murders, or something supernatural was luring campers to their doom. Every nerve in me screamed, "Get out, get out, get out!" But I didn't know how. An idea came. If I could climb one of the larger hills or ridges, maybe I could see the farmland beyond and get a bearing. The forest wasn't mountainous, but there were rolling hills. So I set my eyes on the highest ridge I could find, marching steadily upward. The terrain was punishing. Thorns tore at my arms. The leaves grew thicker. Twice, I tripped on hidden roots, nearly twisting an ankle. Rex's fur stood on end and he started breathing rapidly. Every step was an act of will. At the top, or what I thought was the top, the canopy parted slightly. I glimpsed farmland in the distance, fields turning brown with the season. Relief washed over me. I could see a faint gravel road snaking away. With that general direction in mind, I started picking my way down the slope. If I could keep that farmland in sight, maybe I'd reach a fence line or a boundary road. I didn't care whose property it was. I just needed civilization. Partway down, I found a bizarre structure. A small cave or hollow at the base of a rocky outcrop, scorched black around the opening. Animal bones were piled in a ring outside, forming a crude circle. The stench was rancid, metallic. I had a powerful sense of presence. Something about it was wrong, old. My heart pounded as I realized footprints led into the darkness of that cave. They were elongated, the same prints I'd seen before. I felt certain that it, whatever had taken Zeke, lived in there. I almost turned around, but a glint of red caught my eye. A battered baseball cap lay near the cave entrance, burnt around the edges. Zeke's hat. I swallowed, stepping closer. Maybe I could confirm if Zeke was alive. Maybe I could end this. What the hell am I thinking? I clenched my knife in sweaty hands. Fear raged in my mind, but a twisted part of me thought I might bury the entrance, set the cave on fire. Something. Because if I left this thing alive, it would hunt me down. Rex pressed his nose to the ground, whining. Slowly, I inched forward, the daylight behind me dimming as clouds rolled overhead. A wave of dizziness passed. The wind changed direction, blowing from the cave's mouth, hot, stinking of rot and sulfur. Inside, the darkness flickered. There's a fire in there? I crouched behind a fallen log, peering in. The interior glowed faintly. My head pounded with the pulsing of my own blood. Then I heard a sound that might have been chanting. Low, guttural, in no language I recognized. My limbs trembled as I realized the chanting had a mesmerizing cadence, like an animal trying to speak. Rex barked once and the chanting stopped. Silence fell. My stomach twisted in fear. Footsteps scraped on stone from inside the cave. For a second, my mind screamed to run, but some stupid bravery or desperation kept me there. A figure emerged, hunched, wearing tattered flannel. Not Zeke, but shaped like him. The face was a mockery, pale skin drawn over an elongated skull. The eyes were sunken with milky pupils. It saw me immediately and hissed, lips curling back from jagged teeth. A rancid fluid dripped from them. I realized, in a shock of horror, that it was wearing Zeke's face, like a mask stretched and pinned around its own inhuman features. It wasn't a perfect fit, the corners lifting near the ears. Beneath the edge, I glimpsed raw, black flesh. The same wide grin twitched in recognition. The skinwalker. Some part of my mind whispered. A being that wears stolen faces. I'd heard legends, mostly from southwestern tribes, but never in Iowa. But here it was, real and horrifying. I staggered back. The creature took a step forward, sniffing the air. Its voice came in that layered echo. "Jack, you said you'd help me." The mocking words almost made me vomit. Then the creature smiled with Zeke's mouth, parted in a gruesome grin. Rex barked, lunging. The creature screeched, a piercing cry that seemed to vibrate my skull. I collapsed to one knee, covering my ears. Rex attacked, jaws snapping at the monster's leg. With inhuman speed, the creature slapped him aside, sending him into a tree trunk with a yelp. Rage and terror exploded in me. I scrambled to my feet, brandishing the knife. "Stay the hell away!" I roared, voice cracking. The creature responded with a rasping growl, hunched like a feral beast. I slashed out, connecting with the flannel. There was a spurt of blackish fluid. The creature shrieked, then backhanded me. My vision went white as I tumbled. My knife flew from my grip. Spots danced in front of my eyes. I forced myself upright, spitting blood. The beast advanced, a limp in its step from the wound. It smelled like an open grave. Desperate, I grabbed a thick branch, brandishing it like a club. The creature lunged. I swung with everything I had. The branch cracked over its shoulder, splintering. Another shriek, another wave of that nauseating stench. I saw an opening, my dropped knife. I dove for it, rolling across damp leaves, ignoring the pain in my ribs. My hand closed around the handle. Before the monster could react, I sprang up and drove the blade deep into its chest. A sudden gush of thick, dark fluid poured out, and the creature screamed in a pitch that nearly burst my eardrums. It thrashed, but I twisted the knife. Finally, it collapsed to its knees. I saw flickers of something else behind its pale eyes. Maybe rage, maybe fear. Then a single rasping exhale slipped from its mouth. I stumbled back, panting. The creature slumped sideways, convulsing. My mind reeled. Is it dead? The face of Zeke slid partially off, revealing a black, rotting visage, half human, half something else. I felt a mix of revulsion and pity. What if Zeke's real body was trapped in there? But no, this was no human being. The stench alone was enough to confirm that. I glanced around. Rex was lying on his side, whimpering. I rushed over, gently touching his flank. He yelped, but wagged his tail weakly when he saw me. Thank God he was alive, though clearly hurt. Probably bruised ribs or a sprain. I held him and sobbed in relief. A strangled gurgle made me whirl around. The creature was thrashing, half lifting off the ground, its limbs contorting unnaturally. Then, it fell still. I watched for movement. None. The forest was silent as a grave. For a long moment, I just knelt there, panting, wide-eyed, trying to comprehend what I'd done. The creeping fear that something else was lurking behind me wouldn't leave. What if there's more than one? I had to act fast. I remembered the circle of scorched earth around the cave. Maybe, if I set that hole ablaze, I could bury the creature's lair, make sure it stayed dead, or that any others died too. With shaking hands, I retrieved my knife, wiped it on the grass. Then I dragged the creature's corpse, heavy, half solid, toward the cave entrance. My stomach churned every second, but adrenaline pushed me on. I rummaged inside the cave, ignoring the stench and the chanting runes carved into the walls, until I found something flammable. A near-empty container of lamp oil, plus a pile of rags. The deeper part of the cave glowed with the faint embers, maybe a dying fire the creature had lit. I poured the oil over the creature's limp form, stuffed rags around it, and used the hot embers from inside to start a flame. The rags caught instantly. The stench was horrific, thick black smoke billowing as the flames leapt. The body twitched in the heat as though protesting even in death. I staggered away, choking, tears streaming. Inside, the flames spread to the dried bones and piles of old debris. The whole place crackled. A portion of the cave roof collapsed. Soot and sparks shot upward. I hoped, with everything in me, this was enough to destroy whatever rot festered inside. The conflagration was unstoppable. Soon, that part of the hillside was ablaze. When it was done, I knelt beside Rex, pressing my forehead to his. "We're going," I whispered. "We're getting out, now." He licked my cheek, whimpering but standing. Gingerly, I helped him walk. I had only a vague sense of direction, downhill, then west toward the farmland. Anything to leave the forest behind. We hobbled on, day turning to twilight in a heartbeat. My watch read 5:12 p.m., then 4:59, then 6:23. I wanted to scream, ignore it, just keep going. For hours I followed the slope. The trees parted occasionally, revealing glimpses of farmland. I fixated on those glimpses, willed them closer. Time passed in a blur of agony. My ribs throbbed, my head pounded. Rex stumbled from time to time. But at last, near full dark, we stumbled onto a dirt road. I recognized it as the one I'd driven in on. Relief nearly floored me. I let out a ragged laugh, hugging Rex's neck. We made our way along the road, weaving around ruts and potholes. The moon rose, faint behind the clouds, giving just enough light. After maybe an hour, I saw headlights in the distance. A truck approached, a forest ranger's vehicle, white with a green stripe. I waved frantically, almost sobbing. It pulled up and the driver rolled down the window. A middle-aged man with a badge peered out. "You all right there, friend?" he asked. He had a kind enough face, though lined with concern. I need help," I croaked. "I got lost out here. My phone died. Something happened. There was an animal attack or something. My friend is—" My voice quavered and I couldn't finish. The ranger nodded, gesturing for me to hop in. I lifted Rex onto the seat. The ranger gave him a wary glance but said nothing. He started driving, shining a spotlight along the edges of the road as we went. "You said your friend was attacked?" he asked calmly. "Yeah," I managed. Zeke Lambert, he's gone. And there's others. Dead, I found them. I think I killed the thing that did it. Or maybe it's a person, I don't know." The ranger nodded slowly. "All right, let's get you to safety. Closest station's about 10 miles north." I was about to slump back in relief when I noticed his eyes in the rearview mirror. The reflection glowed faintly in the headlights, almost like an animal's. My blood turned to ice. Then his mouth twitched in a smile, too broad, too slow. A chill shot down my spine. My body tensed, but I told myself I was seeing illusions from my exhausted mind. He started humming softly, no recognizable tune. Rex stirred nervously on the seat next to me, ears flattening. The hum warbled, layered with something else. I glanced at the ranger's face, illuminated by the dash lights. For a split second I saw it flicker. His skin wasn't lined at all, but smooth, waxy. Then it returned to normal. No, I swallowed bile, my heart hammering. We drove on, the hum continuing. The farmland lights grew closer, though. I saw a distinct glow of a farmhouse in the distance. Street lights, signs of life. We're almost out, I told myself. The ranger's eyes flicked to me. "You hear that?" he asked, voice calm. "Thought I heard a dog bark outside," Rex whined, pressing closer to me. "We're inside your truck," I pointed out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't hear anything." The ranger shrugged, that too wide smile returning. "You sure?" I reached for the door handle, testing it. Locked. My pulse thudded in my ears. My injuries ached, but adrenaline soared. I managed a weak laugh. "Must be hearing things," I said, watching the farmland. We were maybe half a mile from a bright yard light. If I could get out, run to that house, knock on the door. The thought gave me courage. I slowly readied myself, bracing. The ranger abruptly jerked the wheel, turning onto a narrower side road away from the lights. "Shortcut," he said, eyes gleaming in the mirror. Fear flared in my gut. "Wait, that's not—" I started. He pinned me with a look that made my skin crawl. "I know a better route," he said calmly. Without thinking, I lunged for the steering wheel, yanking it left. The truck swerved. We careened off the road into a ditch, jostling violently. The ranger cursed, or screeched, in that layered voice. He slammed on the brakes. I seized the moment, unlocking the door and shoving it open. Rex scrambled out. The ranger's hand grabbed at me, nails digging into my shoulder, unnaturally long and sharp. I yelped in pain, but managed to twist free and tumble onto the grass. Rex barked, teeth bared, as I scrambled away from the truck. The ranger lunged after me, half his face gone slack, shimmering like a half-formed mask. I glimpsed black eyes, pupilless. A single ring of light from the nearest farmhouse beckoned. We ran for it. My lungs burned, my shoulder ached, but I refused to slow. Behind me, I heard snarling. Then an otherworldly shriek. "Stop!" a voice shouted in a layered chorus. "Ja-ah-ak!" The way it drew out my name made me want to claw my ears. I kept running until I vaulted a barbed wire fence. Rex squeezed under it, whimpering when a barb snagged his flank. I helped him the rest of the way. Another 50 yards across the field, we reached the farmhouse's yard. A single, dusty pickup was parked out front. Light spilled from a window. I pounded on the door, breathless, heart in my throat. After an excruciating wait, an old man answered, blinking in surprise. His gaze flicked to my bloody clothes, my dog, the wild look in my eyes. "Please," I gasped. "I need a phone." He let me in, stammering in confusion. "What in God's name?" His wife scurried in, eyes wide, handing me a cordless phone. My hands trembled as I dialed 911. The operator picked up, but I barely made sense, raving about a thing in the woods. They assured me an officer was on the way. When they asked my location, the old man gave them the address, all the while exchanging worried glances with his wife. I slumped in a chair, exhausted, hugging Rex. He was shaking too, ears low. Outside, the wind howled across the fields, but I didn't see any sign of the ranger. I half expected that truck to come roaring in, or that thing to break down the door. My entire body thrummed with tension. About 30 minutes later, though it felt like days, a county sheriff's car pulled up. 2 officers came to the door, real flesh and blood humans as far as I could tell. They had me recount the story, though I censored the more unbelievable parts. I told them about a violent man in the woods, about seeing bodies in a pit, about my friend Zeke going missing. Their eyes were skeptical, but the older officer recognized my fear was genuine. He radioed for more assistance, took my statement. I just kept whispering that I wanted to go home. They drove me back toward the forest road in a different squad car, letting me retrieve my car if possible. The road was indeed there, but in the darkness, everything felt dreamlike. No sign of the ranger's truck. No sign of him or it. My own car was still parked where it had died, but now it started on the first try. The officers looked concerned at that contradiction, but they didn't question it. "Get yourself home," they said. "We'll report the missing persons." They took my phone number, which was useless with my phone dead, but they insisted I check in with them soon. As we parted ways, I saw worry in their eyes. Perhaps they believed me enough to sense something was truly off. I wasted no time driving away, ignoring my screaming muscles and battered face. Rex dozed in the passenger seat. In less than half an hour, we were on the highway leading back to Des Moines, the city lights promising normalcy. The tension in my chest only loosened once I saw the skyline ahead. My dog whined, looking out the window, as if verifying reality was still there. We arrived at my apartment in the early hours before dawn. I parked, practically carried Rex inside, and locked every door and window. I collapsed on the living room floor, not even bothering with the bed. Exhaustion consumed me. Days passed. I told friends what happened, but most chalked it up to stress or asked if I'd had a mental breakdown. The local authorities never contacted me again. My phone, once I charged it on a reliable outlet, seemed fine. Just drained. No one could explain how or why it died so abruptly in the forest. Stevens State Forest, for all official records, was the same as ever. No new missing person bulletins, no bizarre creature sightings. Part of me wanted to scream from the rooftops, "It's there, it's real." But I felt certain no one would truly believe me. A week later, I had nightmares. In them, I saw the creature wearing Zeke's face, pinned to a tree by my own hands. I smelled that black blood, felt it spatter on my skin, and in those nightmares the creature's eyes flicked open, watery and bright. It smiled with a slow, terrible grin as if to say, "You only killed one of us." I would bolt upright, panting, soaked in sweat. Rex never fully returned to his old, carefree self. He prowls our apartment at night, sniffing corners, sometimes growling at the door. Once, I woke to find him standing in the hallway, ears pinned back, trembling. I heard something. A faint scratching on the other side of the door. When I checked, of course, it was empty. The building hallway was deserted, but I could smell a faint sulfuric odor. Briefly, I don't go camping anymore. I'm not sure I ever will. Every day, I worry some trace of that horror followed me home. Sometimes, in the bathroom mirror, I catch a glimpse of my face looking off, as though it's not quite mine. My reflection lingers an extra second when I look away. My eyes look a shade lighter than they used to. Am I seeing things? Or was that creature's final curse? So, that's my story. It happened in late October of 2024, deep in Stevens State Forest. I'm telling it so maybe someone else will heed the warning. If you ever step into those woods and find your dog growling at absolutely nothing, if your fire dies without reason and your sleeping bag unzips from the inside, if time itself slips out of your grasp and you see footprints with long, tapered toes, run. And if you run, don't ever look back, because what's behind you might be wearing your friend's face or your own, and once it has you in its sights, the forest might twist forever, keeping you in its labyrinth of nightmares, until you can't remember who you really are. I'm still trying to hold on to my memories, hold on to who I was before the forest tried to take my face. I can only hope I succeeded. But if I hear that voice again, my name drawn out in that horrible, layered echo, I know I'll feel the same terror, the same cold dread forever. Because sometimes, in the dead of night, I'm certain I can hear it scratching at my door, waiting to finish what it started. My name is Mike Dempsey. I'm 34 years old, and the events I'm about to describe happened in October 2023. I've been trying for months now to put it all into words. What I saw, what I lived through, what I barely survived, but it still feels like I'm stuck in that place, in that time. If you're reading this, please understand. I'm not writing for your pity or your admiration. I just need someone else to know the truth. I'm a freelance illustrator by trade. I'm no outdoorsman, and I'm definitely not a military vet or anything like that. My dad took me camping a few times as a kid, but camping back then meant driving a huge RV to a national park with electrical hookups and bathrooms and unlimited Wi-Fi. This trip to Yellow River State Forest was meant to be something completely different. Real solitude, a test of my creativity, a chance to refocus after my life got turned upside down by my breakup with Lacey. She moved out at the beginning of September. That left me alone in our tiny apartment in Cedar Rapids, staring at the walls, churning out sad, half-baked sketches for a children's book contract that was already behind deadline. I decided I needed a radical change of scenery to clear my head. So I found a cheap listing online for a secluded, off-grid cabin in northeastern Iowa, deep in Alamaki County. It was touted as the perfect place to disconnect. I packed my dog, Dakota, an energetic Australian shepherd mix with striking gray-blue eyes, my art supplies, plenty of food, extra clothes for cold nights, and drove out. It was early October, which meant a riot of red and orange leaves across the rolling hills. The cabin was 5 miles into Yellow River State Forest, accessible only by a narrow service road and then a half-mile hike. There would be no electricity, no running water, no neighbors for miles. Exactly what I thought I needed. I arrived on a Tuesday right before dusk. The forest canopy was dense, and the last golden rays of sunlight flickered through the leaves. Everything glowed in that late afternoon hush, where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. My phone still had some signal, but I made a conscious decision to leave it off. The next day, I'd see if I still got any bars. If not, well, that was the point, right? Total isolation. Just me, the dog, and a battered old cabin. The cabin itself looked sturdier than I expected. a small single-room structure with a shingled roof and a stone chimney. There was a porch that sagged a bit, but it kept the door off the ground. There was a creaky rocking chair on that porch, which I had no intention of using because it looked like it might collapse if I blinked too hard. Around the back was a wood pile, and behind that, more forest. So much forest. Nothing but trees in every direction. I can't say I minded. It was nice at first. I unpacked just enough for that first night. Sleeping bag, small grill, a day's worth of water, some jerky for Dakota. I lit a fire in the cabin's stone fireplace as the evening grew colder. Dakota sniffed around, tail wagging, excited. She always loved new places, and it was nice to see her tail wag again. Ever since Lacey left, Dakota had been pacing the apartment, whining. Maybe she was picking up on my stress, but now she was thrilled to be outside in all this space and wilderness. I couldn't say the same for myself once the sun went down. It wasn't fear, exactly, but I felt a heaviness I couldn't place. Maybe it was just the closeness of the tall trees or the reality that I was far from civilization. Every time I stepped outside to grab more firewood, I kept imagining eyes behind the darkness. I wrote it off as me not being used to actual isolation. In the city, there was always a neighbor's light, or a car passing by, or some hum of the highway in the distance. Here, silence reigned. I crawled into my sleeping bag and drifted in and out of restless dreams. I can't remember most of them, but at one point, I heard a child's voice outside, like a little boy laughing. It was so close. I remember sitting up straight, heart hammering, and Dakota started growling with her ears flat. I grabbed my flashlight, shone it at the window, nothing. Of course it was nothing. I convinced myself that it was a dream. I wish it had been just a dream. The next morning, I woke up fully expecting to be on the cabin's floor, but I found myself half inside, half outside the front door. My sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, and I was on the porch, as if I'd sleepwalked there in the night. My flashlight was lying at the bottom of the steps. Dakota was pacing anxiously inside. The door had been left wide open, letting in a draft, letting in who knows what else. I'd never sleepwalked in my life, and that alone was bizarre enough to rattle me. When I coaxed Dakota outside, she trotted onto the porch, sniffed around, then let out a whimper. I glanced at her, and she gave me this uncertain look, like she was trying to tell me something but couldn't. I chalked it all up to the exhaustion and weirdness of the new place. That day, I went exploring. I took a small hand-drawn map the cabin's owner had given me, just a pencil sketch of the local trails. I also brought my phone, though I left it turned off to conserve battery. I wanted to check if I had any bars deeper in the forest in case of an emergency. About a mile into the main trail, I started noticing that the leaves were browning sooner than I'd expect for early October. The air was too cold. The sky a grayish-white. I felt as though the place was aging faster than it should. Dakota seemed uneasy, but she kept close, sniffing, pausing, sometimes staring off into the woods. Then I found something that almost made me laugh. A crooked, gnarled tree that looked like lightning had hit it at some point. The trunk was twisted like a candy cane, the bark black and peeling. It was shaped in such a bizarre way that my first thought was, this could be a great reference for some fantasy illustration. But as I got closer, I realized the sap coming from the trunk was a dark red and smelled like old meat. It made me gag, and Dakota whined, backing away immediately. There were also faint markings carved into the wood. They might have been letters, but I couldn't read them. I didn't stay long. On the way back, I realized my GPS was going haywire. The compass on my phone kept spinning, and the arrow on the map that was supposed to show my position kept sliding in random directions. I was grateful I could see the forest ridge, which guided me in the general direction of the cabin. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't see the cabin's chimney smoke or any sign of clearing. Hours passed. I was sure I'd gone in a straight line, but I kept stumbling onto the same giant oak and the same low rock outcrop. By the time I finally caught a glimpse of the cabin's roof, the sun was going down, and I was shaking with exhaustion. Dakota was panting hard, slumped in the dirt. We'd spent the entire day just trying to get back. I practically fell through the front door, no sense of triumph at having found shelter, only dread that I had gotten so lost so close to home. My phone's battery was down to 30% and still no signal. I fed Dakota some jerky, drank half a bottle of water, and collapsed onto a rickety wooden chair inside the cabin. My sleeping bag was still lying where I'd left it, half on the porch. I pulled it in and set about lighting a fire to warm us. The kindling refused to catch at first. It was as if the flame of my lighter was too weak or somehow snuffed out by an invisible wind. After several tries, I finally coaxed a small blaze in the fireplace. The flames flickered a sickly orange, with odd flashes of blue. I'm not some pioneer who can read flames, but it didn't look normal. I tried to distract myself by sketching. I should have been working on my children's book project, but my hand had a mind of its own. I kept drawing a child's face over and over, big vacant eyes, a thin-lipped mouth. Sometimes the mouth was open in a grin, other times slightly parted, as if whispering. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen that face somewhere, but had I? Before I could dwell on it too long, Dakota started growling again. She was backed into a corner of the cabin, eyes fixed on the window. I looked out through the dirty glass. At first, I saw nothing but darkness and trees and maybe a sliver of moonlight. Then the rocking chair on the porch began to sway, slowly. The boards gave out that ominous squeak, squeak, squeak. The night was otherwise silent. I told myself it was just the breeze. But the breezes that blow at night in Iowa are not usually so intentional. Suddenly, a faint rap on the cabin wall. It sounded small, like the knock of a child. My entire body clenched. I stood, grabbed the flashlight, and whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Just two more taps that seemed to circle around the cabin, as if footsteps were skirting along the perimeter. I held my breath until the tapping stopped. Dakota barked at the window. I joined her, shining my flashlight outside. In the glow, I caught a glimpse of motion. Something darted out of sight behind the porch steps. I froze. Then the rocking chair was still again. No more squeaks. No sleeping happened that night. I propped a chair against the door just in case. Somehow, I must have dozed off near dawn, but I woke up to find that the door was wide open again, and my sleeping bag had been dragged halfway out onto the porch. I jerked upright, adrenaline racing, scanning for intruders. Dakota was nowhere. My heart lurched. I ran outside, calling her name. My voice echoed among the trees. No sign of her. I ran back in, took my phone, still no signal. The battery was at 20%. I carried a flashlight, my hunting knife, and started down the path behind the cabin, shouting for her. I must have gone half a mile in panicked loops before I heard a single short yip. My heart soared for a second. I followed the sound, but it never came again. Instead, I came upon the crooked tree for the second time, bleeding its dark sap into the leaf-strewn ground. My stomach churned at the smell. "Dakota?" I called, my voice trembling. Then I heard something deeper in the woods, a rustling, followed by a faint laugh. It was a child's laugh. I stumbled forward, ignoring every instinct that told me to run the other way. The undergrowth snagged at my pants, sharp twigs scratching my hands. Eventually, I reached a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. and in the center stood an old stone well, crumbled and mossy. A dark figure perched on the edge. At first, I thought it was a bird or some creature. But as I got closer, I saw it was a child, a boy around 8 years old, in old-fashioned clothes, dark trousers held by suspenders, a white undershirt smudged with dirt, and bare feet caked in mud. He was humming softly. I couldn't see his face. His hair was so black it seemed to swallow what little light the day provided. I took a step, and the leaves crunched underfoot. He whipped his head around to stare at me. His eyes were an unsettling, pale gray. A wide smile stretched across his face, as though it had been pulled from ear to ear by invisible hooks. He didn't look scared or threatened. He looked delighted. "Hello," he said. His voice was oddly pitched, shifting between childlike and something deeper. "I'm cold." "Where's my dog?" I demanded, voice quavering. His expression didn't change, the grin just stayed plastered on. He hopped down from the well. "Did you bring me something to eat?" he asked, ignoring my question. My skin prickled. "Where's my dog?" I repeated, louder this time. The child's eyes flicked to the left, where the forest rose up thick and shadowy. "She's with me," he said, or "she will be soon." Then he giggled, the sound echoing unnaturally in my ears. I started forward, but he bolted back into the trees unnaturally fast. I chased, pushing through branches that scratched at my face, tearing at my arms. He was always just out of sight, flitting between thick trunks, that grin occasionally visible through the foliage. Then the forest opened up, and I found myself in front of the cabin again. I glanced around, disoriented. It made no sense. I was sure I'd run the opposite direction. It was as if the woods had twisted in on themselves, spitting me out where I started. My heart pounded, and I sank to my knees on the porch, calling Dakota's name until my throat felt raw. No reply. I spent the next few hours searching. I tried every path leading away from the cabin, only to find that each one looped me back around to the clearing or to the crooked tree. On one pass by that blackened trunk, I discovered Dakota's collar lying in the tangled roots. No dog, no sign of blood. Just her collar. My pulse hammered so loud I could hear it in my ears. I took the collar, tears stinging my eyes. It was the first time the fear turned to anger. I wanted to rip that child's face apart or do something, but I had no idea how to fight something like that. Night fell, and I staggered back to the cabin, defeated. I lit the fireplace again, my mind whirling with desperation. If I couldn't leave, if I couldn't find my dog, what then? I tried checking the map, but it was all nonsense now. Blobs of black pencil and lines that went nowhere. My phone's GPS was still stuck in a glitchy spin, battery at 12%. Someone will notice I'm missing, I told myself. But no one knew exactly where I was, only that I was somewhere in the forest. My plan had been to isolate. I had certainly succeeded. I was about to try turning on my phone's signal again when I heard scratching at the door, like a dog's paw. For a moment, I felt relief. Dakota! I nearly threw the door open, only to freeze with my hand on the handle. Something didn't feel right. I called out, "Dakota?" The scratching paused. Then the door shook a little, as if a weight was pressing against it. I hesitated, but the urge to see if it was my dog overcame me. I opened the door crack, knife in hand. Dakota stood there, tail low. A wave of emotion crashed over me. Relief, confusion, suspicion. She looked okay, no visible wounds. But her fur seemed dull, and her eyes... I can't explain it, but they didn't light up the way they usually did. I stepped back to let her in. She walked inside slowly, almost deliberately. She didn't look at me. She looked around. as if unfamiliar with the place. Then, as I closed the door, I noticed something odd about the way her tail wagged. It was too slow, mechanical. She paused in front of the fireplace, stared into the flames. "Dakota?" I said, uncertain. "You okay, girl?" She turned her head then, and for a second her lips curled in what I almost thought was a grin. Her eyes looked somehow older. She let out a single bark, flat and echoing, and her ears twitched. Then she walked to the corner where her water bowl sat and just stood there, not drinking, not moving, her muzzle hovering inches from the water's surface. Her reflection in the bowl shimmered. She stayed there for nearly a full minute, not blinking. Something was horribly off. I approached slowly, trying to see if she was injured, if maybe she was in shock. "It's okay," I whispered. "Where did you go?" My mind was running in circles. Maybe she'd eaten something poisonous. Maybe an animal had scared her. But the truth was pushing in. That silent possibility that she wasn't really my dog anymore. She turned to me, eyes wide, and I swore I heard that same child's laugh I'd heard before, but from her throat. Her lips never moved. I stumbled back, knocking over the table with my art supplies. My sketches scattered across the floor. Dakota, or whatever wore her body, looked down at one of the papers and gave it a gentle nudge with her paw. It was a drawing of that boy I couldn't stop sketching. Then she looked straight at me and blinked once, too slowly. Her tail wagged in a deliberate sweep and she let out a low growl that ended in a wet-sounding cough. I scrambled for the door. My primal instincts were telling me to run, but half my mind screamed, "She's still your dog, she needs help." Then I remembered the cabin's door was basically my only barrier to the outside. If I ran, I'd be out there in the forest with that child. And I'd lose my cabin. My blood pounded in my ears. Dakota took a step closer, her growl deepening. Then, in a sudden convulsion, she gagged. Something black dribbled out of her mouth. It looked like thick, tarry sap. Her entire body shuddered violently, but she stayed on her feet. I don't know what possessed me, but I lunged for my sleeping bag and tried to throw it over her, maybe to restrain her, or at least not have to look at her eyes anymore. She sidestepped my clumsy attempt with surprising speed, letting out a harsh bark that sounded almost like a laugh. She lunged, jaws snapping. She caught my calf. Pain exploded in my leg as her teeth sank in. I screamed, slamming my knife's handle down on her back, trying to make her let go. A savage, tearing sensation shot up my leg as she wrenched her head side to side, but I managed to yank free, blood darkening my jeans. Fueled by terror and adrenaline, I swung the knife wildly. The blade struck her side, glancing off her ribs. She yelped, and her eyes flickered with something that looked like fury. She clamped onto my knife hand, but I brought my other arm down with the force of desperation, hammering the butt of the knife into her skull again and again. On the third blow, she released my arm and staggered. Her legs wobbled, and she let out a strangled noise. Then she collapsed in a twitching heap. My stomach turned at what I'd done, but I was too shocked to feel regret. I half crawled, half dragged myself to a corner, panting, eyes locked on her body. Blood was pouring from the punctures on my calf. My arms trembled. The world swam in front of me. Dakota's body lay still except for a faint shudder, as if something inside her was still moving. My heart hammered in horror when I realized the black sap was leaking from her mouth, trickling across the floorboards. I tried to push myself upright, but only managed to slump against the wall. Through my haze of pain, I spotted my first aid kit near the table. It took all my willpower to grab it and wrap a tight bandage around my calf. The pain was staggering, but the pressure helped slow the bleeding. I was about to see if I could manage a tourniquet when I noticed a faint scratching sound from behind me. I turned and nearly vomited. Dakota's hind legs were twitching, her body shifting as if something was crawling under her skin. She gave a wet, choking cough. I forced myself up despite the throbbing in my calf, grabbed the only weapon I could see, an old iron fireplace poker from beside the hearth, and I hobbled forward. I steeled myself. Then I brought the poker down on her skull with all the strength I had left. Bones cracked, gore splattered. Tears flooded my eyes. I struck her again and again, sobbing, until the twitching stopped. For a long time I crouched there, panting. My leg felt like it was on fire. I stared at what used to be my dog, a companion I loved. Nausea rose, and I retched onto the floor. Grief merged with fear and self-loathing. This can't be happening. I can't be here. The silence pressed in. And from somewhere beyond my hearing, I was certain I could sense that child laughing. Erlis. I would later learn his name was Erlis, or maybe that was just what he wanted me to call him in my mind. I wanted to run, to crawl back to the highway if I had to, but I could barely walk. My phone was low on battery, and the forest was impossible to navigate. Still, I forced myself to gather a few supplies: bandages, water bottles, my flashlight. I tried to bury Dakota's body behind the cabin, but I couldn't manage it with my injured leg. The best I could do was cover her with a tarp. I sobbed the whole time. Her muzzle stuck out from under the edge, stained with black sap and blood. I felt my sanity cracking, a sense of unreality pounding at my skull. At daybreak, I tried again to find a way out of the woods. My leg would barely support me, but I used a branch as a makeshift crutch. I was determined to follow the sun east until I found some sign of a real road. The day felt too short. The light barely lasted more than an hour before fading, as if the sun had skipped across the sky like a stone on water. The wind picked up, moaning through the branches. Eventually, I realized I was back at that damn crooked tree, my footprints returning me there as if by magnet. In a surge of rage, I swung my stick at the trunk. The bark flaked, oozing that foul red sap. A wave of dizziness almost knocked me out, and I backed away before I retched again. The sky above was turning a bruised purple, like dusk in fast forward, though my watch said it should still be morning. I had no choice but to return to the cabin, battered and furious. My water supply was dangerously low. The world felt wrong, like reality itself was bending. That night, I tried to destroy the tree from afar. I built a small torch and limped back to it, fully intending to set the trunk on fire. If it was some kind of anchor for the evil in this forest, maybe burning it would help. The moment I touched the flame to the bark, however, I felt a burst of cold air swirl around me as though the wind had reversed direction. The flame sputtered and died in a blast of frost. The torch fell from my hand, and I stumbled back, half frozen, the hair on my arm standing up. A child's whisper teased at my ears. I think I passed out. When I came to, it was still night, and my torch was gone. The tree stood silent, its trunk glistening with sticky, dark sap. I dragged myself back to the cabin, half hypothermic, my wounded leg numb and throbbing. I lit the fireplace again. This time, it roared to life in a burst of that eerie blue flame, as if mocking me. The heat felt both comforting and wrong, searing me and leaving me strangely cold inside. I took my phone out, turned it on, and found a single bar of signal. My heart soared. Frantically, I tried to dial 911. It connected, I think. I heard static, then a voice garbled in. I screamed into the phone, "Help! I'm trapped in Yellow River State Forest, near a..." But then it cut out. The screen turned to digital noise. The phone died completely, battery drained to zero. I was alone again. I couldn't even cry anymore. My tears felt used up, replaced by emptiness. I slumped onto the bedroll, which was still soaked in my blood and reeking of sweat. Sleep claimed me in broken intervals. Nightmares swirling with the voice of that child, with the final memory of Dakota's eyes. Somewhere in the depths of that night, I heard another knock on the door. It was that same small, careful knock. I froze, heart thudding. "Go away," I croaked. The knock came again. "I'm cold," whispered the child's voice. "Let me in." I tried to ignore it, to stay silent. But something in my mind pulled at me. An urge to stand, to unlock the door. For a second, my hand actually reached for the latch. Then I shouted, "Go to hell!" The knock ceased, replaced by a faint giggle. After that, all was still. The next morning, if it was morning, I woke to the rancid smell of my supplies rotting. My bread was covered in a black mold, my jerky crawling with maggots, even the bottled water tinged with greenish slime. Horror slapped me in the face. I rummaged through everything, desperate, and found only a single unopened can of soup that still seemed okay. I realized with dawning dread that I could starve out here if I didn't find a way to escape soon. My leg had crusted blood on it from the dog bite, and the bandages needed changing. The wound was hot, throbbing with infection. If it got worse, I wouldn't be able to walk at all. I tried again to set out, but the forest itself refused to release me. Each path wound back on itself. I'd see shapes moving in the corners of my vision, silhouettes that might be me, or a child, or my dog. I'd chase them, end up at the cabin again. The sky flickered from day to night unpredictably. My watch showed that only a few hours had passed, but it felt like days. The sun would set, rise, then set again in rapid cycles. At some points, I was genuinely unsure how much time had passed in the real world. Was it still October? Was it the same year? In my delirium, I thought I saw myself standing in the woods, waving me forward. A second me, identical in every detail, even wearing the same torn jeans, the same blood-stained bandage. It grinned, beckoning me deeper among the trees. Sometimes it whispered in my own voice, "It's safe, this way." I never followed, but it haunted me. I'd see it out the window at night, staring in with wide, hungry eyes. I became convinced that everything centered on that crooked tree. I had to destroy it, or at least break its hold. That final night in the cabin, I decided on a more desperate plan, setting the entire trunk ablaze with every ounce of flammable liquid I could gather. I rummaged the cabin for old kerosene or chemicals. I found a half-full jug of some ancient lamp oil under the sink. My leg was on fire with infection, so I rigged a makeshift splint, popped a handful of ibuprofen, the only pain relief I had, and forced myself into the night. Moving was excruciating. Every step shot pain up my leg, and a trail of blood stained the ground behind me. But I clenched my teeth, using my flashlight to guide the way. The moon was out, or maybe it wasn't. The sky seemed caught between night and day. Shadows fell at impossible angles. In the distance, I heard a keening sound that could have been the wind or a child wailing. But I kept going, because I had nothing left to lose. When I reached the crooked tree, I placed my hand on the trunk just to steady myself, and a cold pain lanced up my arm. The bark felt like living, writhing flesh. I nearly dropped the lamp oil jug in my panic, but I managed to uncap it and splash the entire trunk, ignoring the ribbons of pain in my palm. The stench of that dark sap mingled with the chemical reek, making me gag. I struck a match. The flame sputtered in the swirling wind, threatening to die. I cupped my hands around it, steadied my breath. My heart hammered with desperate hope. Then, with a trembling hand, I touched the flame to the oil-soaked bark. It caught, a column of flame leapt up, sudden and violent, devouring the trunk in swirling orange and electric blue arcs. A screech tore through the night. It sounded like a child shrieking in pain, but also like 1,000 voices echoing. I forced myself to stay upright, ignoring the horrifying screams that came from the burning tree, ignoring the illusions of faces surfacing in the flames. I just kept repeating, "Burn, burn, burn." The heat was tremendous. I backed away, panting, tears streaming down my face from a mix of smoke and fear. Then, out of the conflagration, I saw him. Erlis. He emerged from behind the trunk or from inside it. I couldn't be sure. His clothes were untouched by flame, his skin pale, his eyes black now rather than gray. He regarded me calmly, that too wide smile pulling at his cheeks. "You let me in," Erlis said, voice layered with countless echoes. He stepped forward. The ground under his feet sizzled from the falling embers, but he seemed unaffected. I tried to hold up my knife, but my arms trembled too much. My entire body was about to give out. The child advanced until he stood just out of reach, the flames swirling behind him like a hellish halo. "Stay back," I hissed, brandishing the blade with as much resolve as I could muster. Erlis cocked his head, almost curious. "You killed your own dog," he said, the words biting into me with hateful precision. "You spilled her blood on these grounds." That gave me an entrance. A hideous grin spread across his face. "I'm almost real now." He flickered then, as if the dimension he occupied wasn't stable. My vision blurred. White-hot pain flared in my wounded leg, buckling my knee. I collapsed onto the ground, half crawling backward. Erlis followed lazily, his steps slow, as if savoring the moment. The tree behind him continued to burn, lighting the clearing in a dance of shadows and flickering sparks. The branches cracked, raining embers. The shrieking wail from the trunk began to fade, replaced by a deep groaning, as though the forest itself was in agony. Erlis turned to look at the burning trunk. For the first time, I saw his grin falter. Something about the fire or the destruction of the tree was hurting him. He winced, a flicker of frustration crossing his too young face. That was my one chance. Summoning the last of my strength, I lurched forward and buried my knife in his small shoulder. He let out a sound that was part child's scream, part demonic roar. He staggered, eyes flashing with hate. Black fluid seeped around the blade. It was like the sap from the tree. He tried to recoil, but I grabbed him with my free hand, ignoring the searing pain that jolted through me. I dragged him closer to the flames, inch by inch. The world spun with every wave of pain from my infected leg. He snarled and swung at my face with unnatural strength. My lips split, blood pouring down my chin, but I used the momentum to push him into the burning bark. Flames licked around him. He shrieked like a wounded animal, thrashing. I felt my own skin blistering from the heat. With one final burst of adrenaline, I wrenched the knife free and drove it toward his chest, hoping to end this nightmare. But Erlis twisted aside and my blade sank into the tree trunk instead. A shower of sparks exploded. My vision dimmed, the edges going black. I felt the demon child's hands clamp around my neck, cold as ice, draining the warmth from me. Then something cracked high above us, and a massive, flaming branch came crashing down. Erlis shrieked, letting go of my neck just before the branch landed on him, pinning him against the trunk. A hideous hiss of burning flesh rose, swirling with the acrid smell of char. He flailed, eyes bulging, mouth opening in a silent wail. Through the chaos, I yanked my knife free and crawled backward on my elbows, desperate to escape the waves of searing heat. In that moment, I had the insane notion to finish him, to be certain, but I was barely clinging to consciousness. My entire body was shaking violently, blood running from my busted lip and my leg wound. Fire raged behind me as I stumbled to my feet. Erlis's thrashing slowed, then he went still, pinned under the flaming branch. Sap-like blood pooled around him, steaming. I staggered through the undergrowth, using the last flicker of the firelight to see my way. My vision blurred in and out, but it seemed like the forest was weakening. The strange illusions, the shifting shadows, felt less oppressive. Maybe destroying the tree had broken something. Or maybe I was just dying, and nothing was real anymore. I don't recall how long I stumbled. At some point, daylight broke through the branches. True daylight. A watery, pale sun shining from the east. The temperature felt more in line with a typical Iowa autumn morning. I kept dragging my busted leg, leaning on a snapped branch for support, each step agony. But I recognized the outline of a dirt access road in the distance, and that gave me hope. At last, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the dirt road and saw a battered old pickup truck coming my way. I waved my arms, collapsed to the ground. The last thing I remember was the driver, a middle-aged woman in a flannel shirt, rushing over to me, yelling for someone else to call an ambulance. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My leg was heavily bandaged and an IV line snaked into my arm. The nurse said some hunters had found me, close to death from blood loss and infection. If I'd arrived any later, I likely wouldn't have made it. They had questions for me, of course. Where had I been? What happened to me? And painfully, I had no idea how to explain it all. I mumbled something about a wild animal attack, about getting lost in the woods. The authorities sent a search party out to the cabin, but I never heard any updates. If they found the remains of the tree, or that child's body under the branch, no one told me. I still can't walk without a limp. The scars on my calf remind me of Dakota every single day. I wish I could say I have closure, that I'm free from nightmares. But sometimes, in the early morning when the light creeps just so across the floor, I see a small shape flicker in the corner of my vision. A child, pale eyes, too wide grin. If I focus on it, it's gone. But I can't shake the feeling that Erlis survived, or that maybe he followed me out of those woods. After all, I did let him in once. I keep having these nightmares about returning to Yellow River State Forest, about stepping onto that porch and finding the rocking chair swaying on its own. In those dreams, I open the door and find Dakota's body, still under the tarp, but now breathing, her eyes following me. Then behind me, a tap, tap, tap on the wall. A child's voice begs to be let in. When I wake, my heart is racing and I'm cold with sweat. Even now, weeks later, sometimes I'll look out my apartment window and swear I see a crooked silhouette of a tree in the distance, sap dripping from the bark. I'll blink, and it's gone. But for an instant, I hear a faint, echoing laughter in my mind. Then I remember what he said. I'm almost real now. I try to calm myself by thinking of that final image. Erlis pinned under the burning branch, his flesh blackening in the flames. It gives me a moment of relief, the idea that I ended him. But there's always that doubt, because some nights I'll wake up to the memory of a small hand pressed against mine, a voice whispering, "Let me in." And though I scream in my head to say no, a part of me, some dark corner that's still afraid, still wonders what would happen if I just said yes. That's what truly haunts me, the sense that no matter how far away I get from those haunted trees, he's still out there waiting. The forest is old, older than we can comprehend, and sometimes it births things that cling to you no matter how fast you run. I can only hope that if he tries to break through into my life again, I'll be strong enough to keep the door locked, strong enough not to let him in. I suppose I've written all this because I want someone else to bear witness, to confirm that I'm not insane. Or, if I am, I need the comfort of seeing the words laid out clearly. This truly happened, or at least I truly experienced it. My phone was lost somewhere among the ashes. Even the calls I tried to make might exist in some scrambled record. I can't prove a thing. All I have are the scars on my body, the ache in my heart, and the memory of that horrible grin. If you ever find yourself wandering in Yellow River State Forest, and you come across a twisted, burned stump that looks unnaturally black, turn around. Don't linger, don't pry, don't leave the trail. And if you hear a child's voice in the darkness, a quiet little knock that begs you to open the door, resist it with everything you have. Because once you let him in, he never really leaves. My name is Grant McAllister. I'm 33 years old. This happened in August of 2024, deep in Stevens State Forest near Lucas, Iowa. I'm not a veteran or some hard-edged survivalist. I'm just a freelance web designer who thought escaping to the woods for a week would clear my head and help me get my life back on track. Looking back, that was the worst mistake I've ever made. I had lost my day job in Des Moines due to layoffs, and my relationship with my fiancée ended the same month. Everything in my life came crashing down. I kept telling myself I just needed some fresh air, something quiet, far from the city. I found a corner of Stevens State Forest on an online forum, described as untouched wilderness with minimal foot traffic. Perfect, I thought. No distractions, no people. Just me and my German Shepherd, Jasper. I drove down a dusty back road until it dead-ended at a makeshift parking area. The only other sign of human presence was a weather-beaten wooden trail marker with chipped white paint. The letters were barely legible, something about a path leading toward an old campsite. I parked my car, grabbed my gear, tent, sleeping bag, a few days' worth of food, a couple of canteens, dog food for Jasper, and locked up. The sky was pale blue, the air dry and hot with the last breath of an Iowa summer. Before heading in, I double-checked my phone. Even though I wanted solitude, I still kept it for emergencies. The battery read 89%. Good enough, I thought, because I also had a solar charger. Then I patted Jasper on the head. "Ready, boy?" His ears perked up. He was my best friend, loyal and smart, more comfortable outdoors than in a cramped apartment. I felt safer knowing he was by my side. We hiked into the woods on what looked like an old fire road. Trees stretched tall overhead, offering slight patches of shade from the relentless sun. The forest floor was dense with brush and wild grasses, but I liked it. I expected to walk about 2 miles until we reached a clearing a friend had told me about. He swore nobody ever ventured that far off the main trails. Within the first half hour, I got that exhilarating sense of freedom. My phone buzzed once, a spam notification, then the signal vanished. Exactly what I wanted. To be unreachable. As we continued, I used my compass and a paper map to confirm we were headed in the right direction. The forest was peaceful, and I felt some of my tension drop away. I enjoyed the rustling leaves, the crunch of twigs underfoot, and Jasper's happy panting. We found the clearing right around midday. The ground was soft, free of major rocks, and close to a gentle stream. Perfect place to set up camp. I pitched my tent, staked it firmly, and laid out my sleeping bag. Jasper sniffed around, marking his territory. The day was warm, so I filtered some water from the stream, just in case my canteens ran low. Everything felt normal and perfectly safe. By sunset, I had a small campfire going. Jasper dozed by my side as I used a lighter to spark kindling I'd gathered from the forest floor. I heated a can of soup on a small metal stand, my stomach growling. Sometimes, I told myself, quiet is all you need to think straight. After the chaos in my life recently, a silent forest with only the crackle of the fire and the distant trill of insects was like medicine. That night, I slept fitfully. Not because of fear, but because I wasn't used to the nighttime noises. Owls hooting, branches scraping, the occasional rustle of some small animal in the bushes. Jasper raised his head to listen now and then, but otherwise he seemed content. The next morning I checked my phone. It was dead. Confused, I hooked it to the solar charger. Normally, my phone battery would last a couple of days if I barely used it. I shrugged it off. Technology can fail any time, I reasoned, and I wanted an unplugged experience anyway. But something about the battery draining overnight nagged at me, particularly because I hadn't touched the phone at all. That day, I planned to do a day hike in the immediate area. A little exploring, maybe check the terrain for a second campsite. I studied the paper map, a topographical layout of Stevens State Forest. It was old, but I could make out the major features. With my compass in hand, I set off. Jasper led the way, tail high. We walked for an hour, carefully following the map, and I noticed something odd. The positions of small creeks and rises in the land seemed off. In a few places, the map suggested I should be facing east, but my compass indicated we were going north. At first, I blamed my questionable map-reading skills. Then I considered that maybe the map was just outdated. But no matter how I tried to align my compass with the landmarks, everything remained jumbled. It wasn't a big deal at the time. I laughed about it, thinking I'd be the worst explorer in history. Eventually, we turned back. Strangely, it felt like I'd been out for maybe 2 hours, but my watch said 5 had passed. That set me on edge. My sense of time just didn't match reality. Still, I pushed the worry aside. Maybe I was just enjoying the hike so much that I lost track of the hours. Back at camp, I checked my phone. Even hooked to the solar charger, it stayed dead. The warm sunlight should have done something, but no matter what I tried, the screen remained black. Fine, I told myself. So be it. This was exactly why I'd brought a paper map and a compass. That evening, I tried making a fire again, only now the kindling refused to light. Every time I struck a match, the flame snuffed out. I had a lighter as well, but the wood wouldn't catch. I got frustrated and resorted to using old newspapers from my pack. Only after a suspiciously long time did the flames finally spark to life. Then they burned with an odd hue, blue, green, and flickering. I chalked it up to some chemical in the wood. Jasper stared at the flames like he didn't trust them. I tried to calm him, patting his flank. "It's okay, buddy," I said. He settled a bit, though his ears stayed perked, and he occasionally growled low whenever the fire spit and popped. Despite the eerie feeling, I ate a small meal, gave Jasper his kibble, and crawled into my tent. Night descended swiftly, faster than normal. One moment the sky was that pastel shade of dusk, the next it was pitch black with only a dim, half-visible moon. I fell asleep to the soft glow of the dying fire. Sometime in the darkness, I woke to Jasper's growling. My first instinct was to reach for my flashlight. I unzipped the tent door and shone the beam outside. The fire was completely out, though it shouldn't have been, considering the logs had barely burned for an hour. The night was unnaturally silent. Not even crickets chirped. I heard it then, a child's voice drifting through the trees. A faint sob, then a sniffle, as if someone was crying in the distance. My blood ran cold. No one should be out here, not at this hour, miles from any trailhead. I knelt beside Jasper and he was tense, teeth bared. I'm not heartless. The idea of a lost kid in the forest made me anxious, but also it lit a protective instinct. "Hello?" I shouted. The crying stopped. Silence for a few beats, then soft footfalls on leaf litter. I grabbed my flashlight, a small hunting knife, and stepped out. "Is somebody out there?" I tried again, quietly this time. I heard nothing, so I took a few tentative steps. Jasper followed, pressing against my leg. We walked in widening circles around the campsite. The moonlight helped a bit, but the flashlight beam danced over trunks and branches with little clarity. Then I saw him. A small boy sitting on a fallen log. He looked about 6 years old, wearing a faded t-shirt and shorts that could have been from another era. His feet were bare. I remember the color of his eyes. A glassy gray, set in dark circles like he hadn't slept in days. He turned to face my light, and his cheeks were wet with tears. "Hey, are you okay?" I said, keeping my voice calm. Jasper growled, the fur on his back bristling. The boy wiped his nose with the back of his hand and whispered, "I'm lost." An ice-cold wave of dread crawled up my spine. My mind raced. No child should be here alone. "Where are your parents?" I asked gently. He shook his head, then started to cry again, hugging his knees to his chest. I approached slowly, though Jasper tugged on his leash, as if trying to pull me back. I glanced around, expecting to see a frantic family or other campers. There was nothing but darkness. "My name's Grant," I said carefully. "We should get you warm. Come on, it's not safe to be out here." He nodded, eyes fixed on Jasper, who still snarled. "Is your dog mean?" the boy asked. "No, but he's suspicious of strangers," I said. "He'll calm down once he knows you're not a threat." I coaxed the boy toward my campsite. He huddled close to the dying embers, shivering. Jasper stood a few feet away, hackles raised. I could hardly blame him for being on edge. The whole situation felt off. I rummaged in my pack for some energy bars. The boy eyed them but didn't eat. "Are you thirsty?" I offered my canteen. He stared at it like he didn't know what to do. Eventually, he took a small sip. "What's your name?" I asked, lowering my voice. "Tommy," he said. "Can I stay here? Just for tonight?" The desperation in his voice tugged at my heart. "Of course," I replied. "We'll figure everything out in the morning. Try to get some rest." He sat by the embers. I checked my watch. It read 2 in the morning. The entire night felt suffocating, as if the forest pressed in on us. I crawled back into the tent and made a little space, expecting him to join me, or at least ask for a sleeping bag. But he just sat there, gazing into the remnants of the fire. Jasper refused to lie down, pacing at the tent flap, ears perked. I must have dozed off in spite of the tension. When I awoke to the first rays of dawn, I realized I was alone in the tent, alone in the campsite even, because I didn't see Tommy or Jasper outside. Panic flared in my chest. I scrambled out, calling Jasper's name. My sleeping bag lay unzipped, though I hadn't touched it during the night. It was unzipped from the inside. "Jasper!" I shouted, scanning the clearing. My dog was nowhere to be seen. Tommy was gone too. The fire pit was cold, and no footprints or tracks indicated where they might have gone. I raced around the perimeter, calling, shouting until my throat felt raw. No answer, just the wind in the trees. I started to search in expanding circles, rational mind telling me maybe Tommy left on his own or got scared. Maybe Jasper followed him. But why would my dog leave me? He'd never done that in the years we'd been together. Around noon, I finally slumped against a tree, panting and drenched in sweat. There was no sign of footprints, no broken branches, nothing. "This doesn't make any sense," I whispered. The forest was eerily quiet, except for a random crow cawing in the distance. Desperate, I decided to check my phone again. Still dead. Even with the solar charger out in the sunlight, it refused to power on. I stared at the black screen, dread curdling my stomach. Without the phone, I couldn't call for help. My map and compass were all I had. I fished them out of my pack, intending to return to my car and get real authorities involved. But while my compass pointed north, the map simply didn't match what I remembered. The stream near my campsite wasn't even on the paper. A wave of nausea rolled over me, the unshakable sense that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. I forced myself to think logically. If I headed due west, I should eventually hit the old fire road. Then I could follow that out to my car. I could gather more supplies, call the police from the road if I got a signal, then come back with help to find Jasper and the boy. So I packed my tent quickly, shouldered my gear, and set out in what I believed was the correct direction. My heart pounded in my ears, and I swore the forest looked different, like the arrangement of the trees had shifted overnight. At times, I thought I heard a branch snap behind me, like footsteps, but when I turned, no one was there. After an hour, I glanced at my compass. It indicated I was heading north, not west. Frowning, I corrected my course. Another hour passed, and the sun started dipping toward the horizon. That made no sense. By my watch, it was still mid-afternoon. The shadows stretched unnaturally long. A chill ran through me as I realized how disoriented I had become. Or maybe the forest was screwing with me. Eventually, I stumbled onto a small clearing. In the center stood a ragged old oak. Its branches gnarled like arthritic fingers. Strange objects hung from its limbs. Decaying pouches, melted flashlights, fragments of cloth that looked suspiciously like shirts, hats, and even backpacks. Horror blossomed in my chest when I spotted something bright red, a dog collar. Jasper's collar. I dashed forward, nearly tripping on exposed roots. Plucking the collar from a low-hanging branch, I confirmed the name tag Jasper. The metal ring was bent, as if torn off forcibly. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. I became aware of a rotting stench. At the base of the tree lay a makeshift arrangement of bones, some small and animal-like, others bigger. I couldn't even think about it. My gag reflex kicked, and I stumbled back. Then I saw a battered leather-bound notebook lodged in a knot of the trunk. Curiosity and desperation compelled me to yank it free. The cover was nearly disintegrated. Inside, the yellowed pages contained handwriting scrawled in black ink, dated 1962. The entries described a man's experiences in Stevens State Forest. Nightly sightings of a child, references to missing hikers, strange allusions. The final pages were smeared with what looked like dried blood. A partial line read, "He looks like my son, but he's not. Don't let him touch you." My mind reeled. He looks like my son? A child in the woods. Tommy. My stomach churned. Jasper's collar in my hand felt heavier than lead. I jammed it into my pocket, heart hammering as if it might burst. I had to get out to find a ranger station, some radio, anything. A sudden soft laugh echoed behind me. I spun around. There was Tommy, sitting on a fallen branch. His face was expressionless, except for a faint, eerie smile. "He wouldn't play nice," he said, holding up a handful of dog fur. It was black and brown, the same color as Jasper's coat. Rage and horror burst inside me. "Where's Jasper?" I yelled, lunging forward. "Where is he?" Tommy's expression didn't change. He took a step backward, and I could have sworn his pupils expanded, eating away at the whites of his eyes. "He left," Tommy whispered. "He didn't like me." I wanted to grab the kid, shake him, force him to speak, but a primal fear flooded my limbs. Something about the way he moved, a slight jerkiness, as if he was learning how to imitate a child, stopped me cold. My instincts screamed, danger. This wasn't a normal boy. When I blinked, he was gone, vanished into the dense undergrowth. I stood there, trembling, cursing into the silence. My only focus now was to get out of that clearing and find help. I picked a direction at random, hoping it was west, and marched. The sun dipped behind the trees, plunging the forest into premature twilight. shadows elongated in unnatural shapes, and I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. The leaves rustled, but there was no breeze. Night fell quickly, and I realized with a swell of panic that I wouldn't make it out before dark. I found a relatively open area and decided to set up camp. Every minute felt excruciatingly dangerous, but hiking in pitch-black forest was worse. I used my flashlight to gather kindling and tried to start a fire. It refused to catch, the flames fizzling out the moment they touched the logs. After half an hour of struggle, I finally managed a weak fire that flickered an ugly greenish glow. Too exhausted to search further, I pitched my tent in the dim glow. My entire body screamed with tension. I opened a can of food only to find it smelled rancid, but it was supposed to be non-perishable chili. I threw it aside in disgust and rummaged for another can. Same thing. I found vacuum-sealed jerky, tore it open, and nearly vomited from the stench of rot. Everything was spoiling unnaturally fast, as if the forest was devouring my supplies. An overwhelming sense of dread sank in. The forest felt like a living thing, choking out every attempt I made at survival. My throat was parched, so I sipped carefully from my canteen. At least the water still seemed okay. Sleep was impossible. I sat up in the tent, hugging my knees, listening to the faint crackle of the pale fire outside. My watch read midnight, but it felt like I'd spent days awake. At some point, maybe I slipped into a doze, because I jerked upright when I heard the low rumble of a growl. "Jasper," I called, hope surging through my chest. Then I heard movement outside the tent along with a panting noise. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, stepping out into the firelight. My heart leapt. It was Jasper. He stood on the far edge of the weak firelight, muzzle lowered, eyes reflecting the flicker of greenish flames. I rushed forward, calling his name. "Jasper! You're alive!" He didn't move, just stared. Slowly, I realized something was off. He didn't wag his tail or perk his ears at my voice. He was completely still, head tilted slightly, blinking far less than normal. "Come here, boy," I coaxed, voice trembling. "Please." He patted closer, step by deliberate step, until I could see him clearly. A gash ran along his side, crusted with dried blood. My eyes darted to the collar. It was gone. Despite the wound, he showed no sign of pain. He didn't whine or limp. His stare was empty. I reached out, tears pricking my eyes. "I'm so sorry," I murmured. Then his lips curled back in a silent snarl. Before I could react, he clamped his jaws around my forearm. I screamed, pain exploding as his teeth sank into my flesh. Desperate, I rammed the handle of my knife into his head. That only made him tighten his grip. Blood splattered onto the dirt. My mind reeled. "This is your dog. Don't kill him." But I also knew he was about to break my arm. In a panic, I twisted free, leaving torn flesh in his mouth. I scrambled backwards, sobbing, my knife clattering to the ground. He spat the piece of my skin onto the ground, then stared at me, panting shallowly. In the wavering light, his pupils were wide and dark, reflecting an unnatural gleam. He made no sound. Then he turned and padded back into the forest. My entire body shook. I clutched my injured arm, trying to stanch the bleeding with a piece of my shirt. My thoughts spiraled in horror. Something had gotten to Jasper, Tommy. That thing. I had to face the possibility that my dog was possessed or controlled, or worse, replaced by some twisted imitation. I retreated to the tent, pressing cloth to my wound, trying to calm my racing heart. The pain was dizzying, and the swirl of fear threatened to paralyze me. But I couldn't let myself collapse. I rummaged for my first aid kit, only to find the bandages soaked through with a slimy green mold, as if they'd been rotting for years. I had no choice but to tear strips from a clean shirt and wrap my arm the best I could. Fighting the agony, I curled up in the tent, glancing at my watch. It read 3:47 a.m., but the night outside was preternaturally dark, as if the moon had vanished. I tried to focus on the minutes ticking by, but at some point I lost consciousness from blood loss and exhaustion. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the tent fabric. My watch read 10:15 a.m., but it felt like a full day had passed. My arm throbbed in raw pain, dried blood caking the makeshift bandage. I forced myself to stand, wincing at the pull of torn skin. Outside, the fire pit was empty, not even ashes left. The logs were gone, completely vanished. The faint smell of something burnt lingered in the air, but there wasn't a single charred piece of wood or ember. The forest around me felt muted, as if all the color had been drained away, leaving the greens and browns dull and lifeless. Stumbling forward, I realized I had to keep trying to escape. My supplies had become useless, rotted or moldy, and I had no food. My only hope was to reach a ranger station or the old fire road. Wrapping my injured arm more securely, I shouldered my pack and started walking, ignoring the shaky weakness in my legs. My plan was straightforward. Move steadily in one direction until I found something, anything, that led to civilization. Every so often, I'd pause to check the compass, which insisted I was heading west. The hours crawled by and I hardly recognized the terrain. The entire place felt alien, as if the forest was shifting and rearranging itself to keep me trapped. Late in the afternoon, assuming my watch was accurate, I heard a voice. A soft, lilting, childlike voice. My skin crawled, but I followed the sound anyway, hoping to glean some clue. Pushing through dense brush, I emerged into a half-cleared area with a large boulder jutting from the ground. There stood Tommy, facing away from me as if admiring the rock. "Tommy!" I shouted, anger overriding my fear. "What did you do to Jasper? What are you?" He turned slowly, eyes meeting mine. "I just want a family," he whispered. His tone was heartbreakingly innocent, but the expression on his face was all wrong. Too calm, too cold. "You'll be my father now." I spat blood-tinged saliva onto the ground, rage twisting my face. "Leave me alone." He took a step forward. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, though something in his eyes gleamed. "Not if you accept me." My stomach lurched. The hair on my neck stood up. This was no child. He was something old, malicious, wearing a child's skin. My mind flashed to that final journal entry. "He looks like my son, but he's not. Don't let him touch you." He advanced another step. I fumbled for my knife. The blade was stained with dried blood, my own, from where Jasper had bitten me. My fingers tightened around the handle. "Stay back!" I hissed. Tommy's face twitched, and the corners of his mouth tugged upward, forming a grin that stretched too wide. "I used to have a father," he said, voice hollow. "He died. Everyone dies." Then he rushed me. An explosion of adrenaline shot through my veins and I slashed wildly. The blade nicked his arm, drawing a thin line of dark, syrupy fluid. He stumbled backward, eyes narrowing. A shriek rent the air, so high-pitched it made my ears ring. He clutched his arm. I expected blood, but it looked more like black sludge oozing out. In that moment, I saw the shape beneath the child's form. Something elongated and inhuman, with 2 long limbs. With a ragged hiss, Tommy vanished into the trees, leaving me panting, knife raised, limbs shaking. I pressed on, trying not to think about what I'd just seen. Darkness began to gather again, far too early. Every second felt like a day. Every day felt like an eternity. My watch said 5:30 p.m., but the sky looked like twilight edging into full night. My injury burned, and a feverish haze dulled my thoughts. Just as I was about to give up hope, I spotted a rundown ranger station through a break in the trees. It seemed deserted, window shutters broken, paint peeling off the walls. My heart pounded with a shred of relief. Maybe there was a radio or a landline phone. Even if nobody was there, I could shelter inside. The door was ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the stale air. I flicked on my flashlight, scanning the interior. Chairs were overturned, and a heavy wooden desk stood in the corner. The smell of mildew almost overpowered me. I spotted a cork bulletin board riddled with missing person flyers, some so faded I couldn't make out the photos. I hurried to the desk, rummaging through drawers. Old forms, half-used stationery, a tangle of keys, no phone. My anxiety spiked. I thought all ranger stations had a landline. Maybe it had been ripped out or disconnected years ago. That's when I noticed the children's drawings pinned up around the station. Crude sketches of a stick-figure boy with an oversized grin. Next to him were scribbled images of tall, shadowy silhouettes. More pages depicted animals, dogs, deer, drawn with X's for eyes. Each picture had a childish scrawl at the bottom. Tommy. I felt sick. My breath came in ragged gasps, echoing against the walls. I had to leave to run, but I had nowhere else to go. At the very least, this station offered a barricade. I shut the door behind me, shoving the desk in front of it. Something told me that wouldn't be enough, but it was better than nothing. I found a dusty storage closet with old rations. Most of them were beyond expired, lumps of mold filling the cans. But there was one battered container of powdered soup that smelled okay. I tried to feed on that, mixing it with water from my canteen. The taste was revolting, but it was the first actual food I'd had in days. Night settled in. The windows revealed only blackness. Time had lost all meaning. My watch said 8 o'clock, but it may as well have been midnight. Exhaustion and delirium warred in my mind. Despite my terror, my body demanded rest, so I slumped behind the desk, cradling my injured arm, the knife within arm's reach. Sometime later, I jerked awake. Footsteps echoed on the porch outside, soft, scraping footfalls. A child's giggle drifted through the cracks in the walls. My pulse thundered in my ears. He was here. I stood, knees weak, pressing my back against the wall. The doorknob rattled. I heard that high-pitched laugh, sending adrenaline blasting through my veins. Then, impossibly, I heard Jasper's bark. Except it sounded wrong. Distorted, like an echo in a tunnel. The laughter stopped. Silence. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to detect movement. After a long moment, the footsteps receded, and the porch creaked. I exhaled, sinking to the floor, relief mingled with dread. I must have dozed again. My body was at its limit. When I woke, pale dawn light streamed through the grime-encrusted windows. Feeling slightly more alert, I decided to search the station more thoroughly. Maybe there was a hidden radio or a map I could use. I pried open a locked drawer with the tip of my knife and found a folded map of the forest. My heart soared for a moment. This was a better map than the one I had. It showed a detailed route to the main road just a few miles away. If I could actually follow it, I might find my way out. Slinging my pack over my shoulder, I limped out of the station. I kept my eyes on the ground, scanning for any footprints. The dirt was disturbed, as if multiple people had been shuffling around during the night. Some tracks looked like they were made by small barefoot feet. I shuddered. Relying on this new map, I headed northwest, crossing a small ridge that should have led to an established trail system. As I walked, hours bled together. My wounded arm throbbed with every heartbeat, making me lightheaded. I forced down a few sips of water from my canteen, though my throat felt like sandpaper. Eventually, I emerged onto what looked like a gravel service road. Relief nearly buckled my knees. I followed it, ignoring the rising ache in my calves. Just a bit farther, I told myself. You're close to the exit. After walking another mile, I spotted a battered sign, Stevens State Forest Boundary. Beyond it stretched farmland. I nearly sobbed in gratitude, stumbling into the open fields. My mind spun with the realization that I was free. Free from that cursed stretch of woods. But as I neared the horizon, something about the sun's position caught my eye. It was setting, even though my watch said noon. The farmland itself had a hazy, dreamlike quality. My relief gave way to confusion. Was I hallucinating? That's when the sky cracked with an ear-splitting noise and the fields went dark. For a moment I blinked, disoriented. My watch now read 3 a.m., yet I hadn't seen the minutes pass. The farmland was gone. Instead, I stood on the edge of a forest clearing. The sign was there, but behind it lay the same trees, the same twisted paths. I broke then, letting out a sob of pure despair. Time itself was twisting, coiling around me, refusing to let me leave. The forest was a labyrinth. I sank to my knees, hammered the ground with my fist, not caring about the pain. Then I saw the flicker of headlights. A faint glow cut through the darkness, maybe 100 yards away. A car? Another sob tore from my chest, but this time laced with hope. I staggered forward, practically crawling. Sure enough, a battered old pickup truck was parked near a small clearing, headlights on, the engine running. I cried out, "Help, please!" As I got closer, I saw a figure step out. A man with a lean frame, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, his hair hidden beneath a baseball cap. He raised a hand in greeting. "Whoa there, buddy. You all right?" Tears streamed down my face as I stumbled into the glare of his headlights. "My dog, there's a kid." I couldn't form coherent sentences, blood loss and trauma overwhelming me. "Easy now," he said, guiding me to the passenger side. "Let me see that arm." I blinked at him, not fully trusting. But my desperation outweighed caution. He pulled back the tattered bandage, wincing at the sight of the wound. "That's infected," he muttered. "I can drive you to a hospital." I almost collapsed in relief. The man introduced himself as Owen, said he was out checking an old property line. He didn't seem suspicious. I clung to the seat as he drove slowly over the rough terrain. The truck bounced and rattled, my body jostling painfully. Still, it was better than walking. He kept glancing at me, worry in his eyes. "You look like you've been through hell," he said. "What happened?" I babbled about the forest not letting me go, about a demonic child, about my possessed dog. Owen's face tightened, but he said nothing. I caught him stealing uneasy looks in the rearview mirror. Probably thought I was crazy. After maybe 20 minutes, the headlights illuminated a dirt path that led to a small rural highway. Relief swelled in me again. I saw a weathered sign indicating a hospital was 20 miles away. My vision blurred with tears. This time I told myself I was truly out. But as we drove, I began to drift. My exhaustion soared and I let my eyes close. The hum of the engine lulled me into a half-sleep. Then, a voice whispered from behind me, so faint I thought I imagined it. "He's lying." I jerked awake, my heart hammering. I glanced at Owen, but he was staring at the road. "Did you say something?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, bud. Just drive safe, you know." Sweat prickled on my temples. I tried to calm my nerves, telling myself I was hallucinating from blood loss. Yet a growing dread expanded in my gut. I stole a look at the truck's interior. Old coffee cups, a crumpled map on the seat. Then something glinted on the floor, Jasper's collar. My breath hitched. I slid forward to pick it up, hands trembling. "Where did you get this?" I croaked. Owen glanced down, then back at the road. Must have been in here for a while. You know, I find random stuff all the time." The collar was definitely Jasper's. Same red color, same silver tag. My heart hammered so fiercely I couldn't speak. Then Owen turned to me, smiling too wide. "You okay?" His eyes looked black in the glare of the headlights. Panic roared in my brain. I lunged for the door handle, flinging it open. Owen swerved, cursing as I fell out of the moving truck. My side slammed onto gravel, pain detonating in my arm and ribs. Still, I forced myself to roll away from the wheels. Behind me, the truck screeched to a halt. I managed to get to my feet, wavering, the world spinning. Owen, or whatever was wearing Owen's face, stepped out. He stood in the headlights, his expression twisting with anger. The air tasted like metal. I clutched my knife, ignoring the agony in my arm. "Stay back!" I shouted. He made a noise, half growl, half laugh. Then his features shimmered, like a heat mirage, and for a split second I saw the child's shape superimposed over him. "So close, Grant," that soft voice whispered. "You almost escaped." My entire body trembled. I backed away, inch by inch, until my heel hit a rut, and I fell onto my back. Pain lanced through me, but I kept my eyes on the figure. He advanced, tilting his head at an unnatural angle. Desperate, I did the only thing I could, threw my knife. It spun through the air and lodged in his torso. A shock wave of black fluid splattered the headlights, and a banshee-like scream ripped out of his throat. For an instant, the illusion peeled away, revealing a gangly, inhuman form that dwarfed the shape of a child. I scrambled up, stumbling forward despite dizziness. The creature collapsed to one knee, howling. I saw an opening, so I ran, sprinting into the dark fields. My legs were leaden, my vision blurred. The screams echoed behind me, but slowly grew fainter. My feet pounded the dirt. My breath came in ragged sobs. I don't know how long I ran. Time warped again, the sky alternating between darkness and dawn in random intervals. Each step felt like a nightmare repeating. Eventually, my legs gave out. I collapsed on the side of a paved road. Asphalt. Real. Solid. I sprawled there, panting, tears of both terror and relief streaming down my cheeks. I must have blacked out. The next memory I have is waking up in a hospital bed, an IV in my arm. White walls, antiseptic smell, the beeping of machines. I nearly choked on a sob of gratitude when I realized I was truly out of the forest. A nurse rushed over, asking me to breathe slowly. According to hospital records, I'd been found delirious near a country highway. Dehydrated, with a serious infection in my arm and signs of extreme exhaustion. They treated me for blood loss, closed the lacerations, and pumped me full of antibiotics. The doctors asked what had happened. I mumbled something about being attacked by a wild animal, that my dog was missing. One of the local rangers dropped by, took my statement. I didn't dare tell them about a child demon or illusions. They would have locked me up in a psych ward. Days passed before I was discharged. They never found Jasper or any sign of a boy named Tommy. The official stance was that I got lost, sustained injuries from an animal, and hallucinated details due to sepsis and trauma. No matter how much I insisted something evil lurked in that forest, they wouldn't take it seriously. I went back to Des Moines to recover. My arm healed, though it left a deep cluster of scars from where Jasper bit me. Sometimes at night, I'd wake from nightmares where I relived that moment over and over, feeling his jaws clamp down on my bones. Months later, life had a semblance of normalcy. I found part-time work, moved to a smaller apartment. But my mind never shook the memory of that child's grin. The shifting forest, the sense that time itself had turned against me. I'd tell myself it was all behind me, that I was safe. Then, one night, I heard a knock at my apartment door. It was nearly midnight. I shuffled to answer, heart pounding. On the other side, I found nothing but an empty hallway. Yet, as I stood there, I heard a whisper. "Can I come in now, Daddy?" Everything inside me turned to ice. I slammed the door shut, slid the deadbolt, and pressed my back against it, mind spinning in panic. That voice. It was the same child's voice from the forest. I stayed there the rest of the night, wide-eyed, knife clutched in my uninjured hand. I wish I could say that was the end, but the truth is, some nights, I still sense his presence. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a half-heard giggle in the hallway. I can't stand looking in mirrors at dusk. Sometimes, for just a moment, I see him standing behind me, silent and watching. Even though I escaped that forest, crippled whatever that creature was for a time, it isn't over. Maybe it never will be. The day I heard that knock, I realized something horrible. You can leave Stevens State Forest, but it won't leave you. And if that thing wants you, like it wanted me, you can never truly be free. It will always find a way inside. I don't sleep much anymore, I can't. Because every time I close my eyes, I see him. And every time I dream, I'm back in those twisted woods, the compass spinning uselessly. Sometimes, in my nightmares, I hear Jasper barking in the distance, and I run, but I never find him. In those dreams, Tommy always appears, smiling too wide, and asks me if I'm finally ready to be his father. Maybe one day I'll stop running, or maybe that thing will drag me back forever. But for now, I'm still here, telling my story and praying that no one else goes into that forest alone. My name is Jack Riley. I'm 33 years old. This all happened in late September 2023, a time I had assumed would be a respite from the chaos of life. For context, I used to work as a paramedic in Des Moines, Iowa. I left that job about a year ago after one particular emergency call that ended in tragedy. A child, just 7 years old, died on my watch, despite everything I did to save him. That day, something inside me changed. Maybe it was guilt, or just the harsh realization that life can be terrifyingly fragile. It's what drove me to leave that career and isolate myself from the rest of the world. So, in an effort to help me heal, my longtime friend Tyler McCabe suggested a backcountry camping trip. We'd grown up together, parted ways after high school, and only recently reconnected. Tyler is 34, a freelance photographer who's equal parts thrill-seeker and smartass. He insisted we head up to Yellow River State Forest in the far northeast corner of Iowa, a place known for limestone bluffs and thick oak hickory forests. I initially didn't want to go. After all, I'd gotten used to my own company, just me and my German Shepherd Rex. But Tyler can be persistent, so I eventually said yes. We planned for 5 days deep in the forest. Tyler wanted to snap photos of old, abandoned cabins and interesting landscapes for some art project he was working on. He said the trip would also be a great chance for me to disconnect from the outside world. No cell service, no responsibilities. I tried to be optimistic. Rex, my loyal companion, seemed eager too. He's a big German Shepherd, black and tan, with a keen sense of things I sometimes miss. Maybe that's why I agreed. At least I had him if Tyler got too annoying. I still had no idea that the next week would leave me questioning my sanity, seeing things that I didn't believe possible, and fighting for my life in ways that made my paramedic days look simple by comparison. We set out on a Monday. Tyler arrived in a battered old Jeep with camera gear and a bright grin plastered across his face. The drive was about 3 hours from Des Moines, and during that time Tyler rattled on about the various places he'd read about. Old logging roads, deer paths, spots near Paint Creek with trails that vanish if you don't look carefully. The forest is large but not monstrous. Under normal circumstances, you couldn't truly get lost if you had a decent map. I remember Tyler glancing at me more than once, as though he were excited to see how I'd handle the wilderness. I'm sure he was hoping for a dramatic reaction. He got far more than he bargained for. We parked at a small gravel lot near a sign that read Paint Creek Unit, Yellow River State Forest. 2 rangers were there, seemingly finishing their shift. They watched us haul our gear onto our backs. Tyler, in particular, had quite the load. A big camera bag, lenses, a tripod, plus the usual camping gear. I traveled lighter. Tent, sleeping bag, a couple days' worth of dehydrated food, a water filter, and a small first aid kit. Rex had his own harness with pouches for dog food and water. I made sure to fill out the backcountry camping permit at the small kiosk. Then, with a wave to the rangers, we started down a trail that cut into dense greenery. The plan was to hike about 4 miles in, find a good campsite near a ridge Tyler claimed had spectacular views of the sunrise, and set up there. Within an hour, I noticed the quiet. Not the typical forest quiet, because you could still hear rustling in the leaves, small animals scurrying, and a mild breeze shifting branches. But there was an edge to it, as if the forest was holding its breath, watching us. I shook off the feeling. Didn't want to be paranoid, but Rex was unusually alert, nose constantly up in the air, ears pricked. At times he would freeze, staring at something beyond the trees. Then he'd shake his head and trot to catch up to us. We found our campsite near the crest of a low ridge that dropped off into a valley. It really was a beautiful place, with the late afternoon sunlight painting the treetops gold. We set up the tents in a small clearing. Tyler was excited to build a fire right away, but I wanted to gather more wood first. As I wandered a few dozen yards from our site, Rex at my side, I picked up dead branches and twigs. Then I saw something in the distance, a large shape moving between the trees. Could have been a deer, but it seemed tall. Too tall. I paused, squinting. But nothing was there. Rex let out a low growl in the same direction, only to relax moments later. Probably just a buck, I muttered to myself. I felt a twinge of unease. That evening went by quietly enough. We sat around a fire that crackled and cast dancing shadows across the clearing. Tyler told me about his various freelance gigs, weddings, sports events, nature photography for a local magazine. He pulled out his camera and snapped pictures of the fire and of Rex dozing at my feet. I still think about that emergency call, I found myself saying. Tyler paused, and I realized I'd just spoken the words out loud. I'm hoping time out here will clear my head, I added, trying to shake off the heaviness in my tone. Tyler gave me a look of understanding, then forced a grin. Don't worry, man. We're gonna have a good time. He raised his thermos. Here's to, new beginnings. Yeah, I said. But something about the darkness around us felt too large, too consuming. My gut twisted in a weird knot. I tried to chalk it up to old guilt. We turned in soon after. Around midnight, I heard rustling outside my tent, but I assumed it was Tyler or maybe just the wind. That was enough to keep me awake, however, drifting on the edge of consciousness until morning. I'm not sure when I finally fell asleep, but when dawn broke, I woke to a strange hush. Usually the forest is alive with birdsong at sunrise, but there was silence. It weighed on me like a damp blanket. As I unzipped my tent, I realized it was still a bit dark out, more like pre-dawn than morning. I checked my watch. It read 6:47 a.m. By that time in late September, there should have been at least a hint of sun. The sky, though, was a dull gray, as if the sun had overslept. When I looked over at my friend's tent, the zipper was undone, but Tyler was nowhere in sight. Rex, normally bounding up to greet me, also wasn't around. I was immediately on alert. Standing up, I felt the hair on my arms prickle. I called out for Tyler. No answer. I whistled for Rex. Silence, except for a breeze sliding through the leaves. About 5 minutes later, Tyler came crashing through the undergrowth carrying a thick branch. He was panting. Rex trotted behind him, tail high. "Went to find some wood," Tyler said. "Glad your dog decided to join me. Couldn't sleep." I nodded. It made sense, but the uneasy feeling didn't subside. We'd only gotten here the day before. It was probably just a bit of first-night jitters on my part. Soon, though, more oddities emerged. My phone battery, which had been at 80% the night before, was dead. I'd put it on airplane mode, yet it showed 0 charge. Tyler's phone was similarly drained. That wouldn't be so strange if it were frigid winter, but the nights were cool, not enough to kill a lithium battery so fast. "Guess we really are off the grid," Tyler joked. But I saw he was concerned. It wasn't a huge deal. We'd planned to be offline anyway, but the sudden loss of battery life felt unnatural. A bigger issue arose when I checked the GPS to confirm where we were on the map. It placed us in the middle of the Mississippi River, which was at least a few miles east of us. I flicked the device off and on, but it wouldn't reset. Then it died, just like the phones. Now, that was a concern. I studied the paper map. Yellow River State Forest is well labeled, but the contours and trails didn't match what we'd hiked the day before. I tried to think rationally. Maybe we'd taken a wrong turn on an unmarked trail, ended up in a different quadrant. It didn't sit right with me, but I had no other explanation. We decided to remain calm. The day went on as we planned, exploring the ridge, snapping photos of different vantage points, collecting pictures of curious rock formations. Rex stayed by my side most of the time, though occasionally he would dart off after some scent, then return after a few minutes. Tyler was in high spirits, excited about the shots he was getting. Then, late that afternoon, we discovered something deeply disturbing. At the bottom of the ridge, near a shallow stream, we found a deer lying on its side. It looked to be recently killed. Its flesh was still pink, but the entire hide had been peeled back, as though by a careful, precise hand. There was no blood on the grass or leaves around it, which was impossible if a predator had done this. The deer's head was turned almost 180 degrees around, facing its own spine in a grotesque twist. Flies hovered around the carcass, and the smell was rancid. We stared at it for a long time, neither of us speaking. Finally, Tyler raised his camera, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I said. "It's not right." He swallowed and nodded. As a paramedic, I'd seen my share of horrible injuries and carnage, but the deer's unnerving position and the total lack of blood made my skin crawl. We left quickly. That evening, we tried to start a campfire. We had plenty of kindling and dry wood, and while the fire lit, it burned strangely, flickers of blue and green dancing through the flames. Tyler joked that maybe the wood had some chemicals on it, or that some weird fungus was at work. But I could see in his eyes that he was spooked. Rex wouldn't come near the fire. He stood about 10 yards away, letting out a low whine. As the darkness thickened, I suddenly noticed that our surroundings had gone silent again. The effect was even more pronounced than the morning. No crickets, no owls, no rustling, just the crackle of that oddly colored fire. It was around this time that we started to notice problems with our gear. Around 10 p.m., Tyler got up to use the bathroom. He left his backpack by the fire. Rex whined and whimpered, staring into the trees. When Tyler returned, his backpack was gone. We combed the perimeter with flashlights. No sign of it. That bag had most of his clothes and toiletries, some of our spare food rations, and his extra camera lens. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe a raccoon or coyote dragged it off, though a coyote dragging a fully loaded 40-pound backpack seemed unlikely. Still, we told ourselves it might just turn up in the daylight. With our nerves frayed, we decided to just call it a night. I insisted on keeping Rex in the tent with me. When I crawled inside, I found my sleeping bag was unzipped. Odd, because I was certain I had zipped it after airing it out. Then I noticed it was unzipped from the inside. It was such a small thing, but it made me shiver. I forced a laugh, telling myself I was being paranoid, and pulled the bag closed. Rex settled in near my feet, seemingly calmer. I listened to Tyler shuffle around in his tent for a few minutes, then everything went quiet. At some point, I dozed off. My dreams felt disjointed. I saw flickers of a shadowy figure moving across the ridge, long-limbed and hunched. Then I dreamt that I was back in the ambulance, hearing that child's ragged breathing, only for it to fade into the whisper of a wind through trees. I jerked awake, heart racing. Rex was gone from the tent. The zipper was shut, but he was nowhere inside. That made no sense. He couldn't have just vanished without opening the tent door. I scrambled out, flashlight in hand. Tyler's tent was zipped up. I called Rex's name. The forest swallowed my voice. Fear coiled in my gut. Then, movement behind me. I spun. There was Rex, trotting toward me from the darkness, tail wagging as if nothing was wrong. My knees practically buckled from relief. I coaxed him back into the tent, scanning my surroundings warily. No sign of anything lurking. Morning came with a slow, dull light. I checked my watch again. It had stopped at 3:33 a.m. The second hand was ticking in place, not moving forward. Tyler's watch read 8:15 a.m., but the sky looked like it could have been maybe 6 in the morning. The discrepancy unnerved us both. We decided we should break camp and head back. Our best bet, we reasoned, was to cut the trip short and hike out while we still had some rations left. We had no functioning electronics, and everything about this place felt wrong. The final straw was discovering that our canteens reeked of rot, despite the water being filtered fresh from a stream we knew was safe. When we unzipped Tyler's tent to pack it up, we found muddy footprints inside. Small footprints, almost child-sized, crossing from one side of his tent to the other. By midday, we were on the move. Tyler was trying to navigate with the map. We followed what should have been a main trail based on the topography. Instead, it led us deeper into the forest. We even found ourselves crossing the same stream 3 times in different places, but the same stream. It felt like a cruel trick. Every time we paused, I felt eyes on me. Rex's hackles stood up more than once. At one point, we came across a clearing where we noticed a single deer antler lodged upright in the ground. It looked deliberately placed, and the base was covered in fresh, crimson blood. We skirted around it, unsettled. Tyler tried to laugh it off. Some local hunter messing with us? But he was pale. I was too tense to respond. Eventually, we came upon an old, half-collapsed shelter that might have been a ranger's cabin decades ago. The roof had caved in and moss covered the walls. Tyler wanted to check inside for supplies or at least a place to rest. I didn't like the vibe of it, but we were exhausted. Inside, it smelled of damp rot, like wet leaves left to mold over the years. We found a rusted table, broken chairs, and the remnants of a wood stove. Tyler rummaged around and discovered a battered first aid kit in a cabinet. Amazingly, it still had a few bandages and a roll of gauze. As we were about to leave, Rex began growling at a back corner. I flicked my flashlight there and froze. I thought I saw someone crouched in the corner, but when Tyler swung his flashlight too, the corner was empty, just rotted planks and cobwebs. We heard something skitter or scrape along the wall. Tyler and I spun around, but again, nothing. An irrational panic seized me, and I grabbed Rex's collar. "Let's get out of here," I hissed. We hurried outside just in time to catch a glimpse of movement in the tree line. For half a second, I saw me. My own face glaring back at me from the shadows, twisted in hatred. Then it vanished. I heard a rustle of leaves and a clicking sound, almost like an insect. Tyler swore under his breath, and we ran. I didn't have the breath to speak, but every fiber of my being screamed that we needed to keep moving. Late afternoon found us back on a ridgeline. We were sweaty, tired, and short on water. Tyler said he was going to gather some wood for a fire. We needed warmth for the night to stay visible in case any hikers or rangers were out there. I nodded, looking around warily. Rex stood by me, panting heavily. I sat on a rock, rubbing my temples and fighting an oncoming migraine. The quiet pressed down on me like a physical weight. Once or twice, I thought I heard a voice calling my name. My own voice drifting through the trees. My mind was splitting at the seams. Minutes dragged on. Tyler didn't come back. Eventually, I checked the time on his watch. More than an hour had passed. I got up, whistled for Tyler. No response. Rex pricked his ears, whining softly. We started searching the area. The sun was inching low behind the trees, painting them with an orange glow. Still, no sign of Tyler. Panic gripped me. If he was lost or injured, we had a serious problem. Then, just as I was about to shout for him again, Tyler emerged from behind a cluster of oaks with an armful of sticks. He looked off. Not in an obvious, physically disfigured way, but there was something about his eyes, the way they stared too long. He was breathing a bit harder than normal, even for someone carrying wood, and his smile was too wide. Unnatural. Rex bared his teeth at him, then whined and retreated behind me. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to maintain calm. He didn't answer right away. "Just found some good wood," he finally said, voice slow. The words felt spaced out, like he was carefully pronouncing each one. Then he added, "It's beautiful out here, right?" I frowned. "We're leaving tomorrow at first light," I said. "We'll head south. Even if it takes us all day, we'll find a road or a ranger station." He just stared at me, not blinking. Then he nodded slowly. "Sure," he said. "Sure thing." Darkness settled in. We built a small, smoldering fire. This time, it flickered in more normal hues of orange and red, though occasionally I saw a tendril of green flame. Tyler sat across from me, not really eating, just watching. I tried to talk to him to see if he was dehydrated or confused, but he wouldn't engage. I felt my stomach tighten with dread. Something was very wrong. I had dealt with dementia patients or those in states of delirium before. This felt different. More sinister. That night, I slept only in fits. My dreams were heavy and filled with images of that deer we found, its eyes rolling in horror, then the child from my paramedic shift. Somehow, they morphed into the same figure, pale, skinless, pointing at me. When I woke, it was still dark, and I heard hushed murmuring. I realized Tyler was talking to himself outside my tent, near the dying embers of the fire. The voice sounded like mine. He was speaking in the same timbre and cadence I used. He repeated strange phrases about being lost, about wanting new skin. A primal terror seized me. I lay still, barely daring to breathe. After a while, the murmuring stopped. I eventually heard footsteps moving away. Once the forest was quiet, I peeked out. Tyler was gone. Rex had woken up, pressed against me, whining. I wondered if I should follow Tyler, but fear kept me rooted. If he was in that state, confronting him in the dark seemed like a bad idea. Eventually, I drifted into a light, anxious sleep. When the sky began to lighten, a pallid gray replaced the black of night. I unzipped the tent, searching the clearing for Tyler. He was nowhere to be seen, but I spotted footprints leading toward the slope. Rex and I followed, stumbling through thick undergrowth until we reached a cluster of trees. We found him there, and my heart dropped. He had Rex pinned to the ground, one hand over the dog's muzzle, the other holding my hunting knife. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind refused to process it. Then I recognized the glossy fear in Rex's eyes. Tyler looked up at me, his expression vacant except for a too-wide grin. "Stop!" I shouted, voice cracking. I lunged forward, but Tyler yanked the knife in a swift slash. Rex let out a strangled yelp. It was a sound I'd never heard him make before. Blood spilled onto the leaves. Tyler was cutting. His motions were deliberate, methodical. My entire body ignited with adrenaline. I slammed into Tyler, grabbing his wrist. He turned and struck me in the face with shocking strength, sending me staggering. The taste of blood filled my mouth. I could barely see from the tears welling up. My dog's whines were horrifying, mixed with the gurgle of blood. The memory of that child in the ambulance flared in my mind, failing another helpless life. I refused to let it happen again. Snarling, I tackled Tyler to the ground. He let out a guttural screech which didn't sound like him at all. He twisted underneath me, nearly throwing me off. I grabbed the knife hand, forced it away from Rex. The blade clattered onto the ground. Tyler's head snapped forward, and he bit at my forearm, drawing blood. I roared in pain. As I wrenched back, I managed to elbow him in the face, but he barely reacted. The look in his eyes was inhuman, black, as though his pupils swallowed the iris. I stumbled for the knife, seized it, and swung it in a wide arc. The blade sank into Tyler's neck. Warm blood spattered across my hand. He gave a violent jerk and a hiss, then fell back onto the forest floor. Rex whimpered weakly. My mind screamed, check on the dog, but also get away from Tyler. Heart hammering, I crawled to Rex's side. A jagged wound along his flank gushed blood. His eyes were rolling. I tried to stanch the bleeding with my bare hands, pressing on it, trying to remember my training. He was trembling, letting out soft whimpers. "I'm here, buddy," I whispered frantically, tears streaming down my face. The memories of that child's final moments slammed back at me. I couldn't lose Rex, not like this. Behind me, I heard movement. Tyler was twitching on the ground, blood soaking the leaves around him. Then, in a choking voice, he spoke, "Jack, help me." It almost sounded normal for a split second. My heart wrenched. Could I save him? Was he possessed or delirious? Should I perform first aid? Then his voice warped, layered with a horrific growl. "Your dog's skin would have made a fine coat." His body spasmed, and something parted the skin of his back. A bulge moving beneath, like an impossibly large insect. I stood, panting, brandishing the knife. If this was a hallucination, it was the realest one of my life. The thing tore free, but I saw nothing but a shimmer in the air, a vague shape that vanished among the trees. Tyler collapsed. His eyes were glassy, mouth parted in a silent scream. With trembling fingers, I pressed 2 fingers to his carotid artery. No pulse. He was dead. My mind raced. I'd just killed my best friend, but it felt like something else had already taken him away before I dealt the final blow. Disbelief and horror washed over me. At the same time, my paramedic instincts kicked in. Keep my dog alive. That was my immediate priority. I turned back to Rex, who was losing blood rapidly. The gash was deep. I dragged him back toward the clearing, where I rummaged through the first aid kit. I used the roll of gauze we'd found in that old cabin to apply pressure, wrapping it around Rex's flank. My hands shook so badly it took me twice as long as normal. Finally, I managed to slow the bleeding, but it didn't stop entirely. Rex was shaking, eyes half-lidded. "Hang on," I whispered, voice thick with tears. "Stay with me." I stroked his head, feeling the warmth of his fur. "I won't leave you." Realistically, he needed immediate veterinary care, but we were days from any help, maybe hours if we got lucky and found a ranger. Regardless, I had to try. I searched the campsite. My mind was in survival mode, pushing aside shock and grief. I'd handle that later if I made it out. I found some water and gave Rex small sips. Tyler's gear was scattered near where we'd pitched the tents. The camera lay in the dirt, lens shattered. His tent was partially collapsed. I realized with a gut-churning jolt that it was only me, my dog, and a corpse in the middle of this forest. And who knew if that thing still lurked nearby, waiting for me to let my guard down. I decided to leave Tyler's body. Perhaps the rangers could recover it later if I was able to find help. It felt cold, but there was no other choice. I fashioned a makeshift travois from some broken branches and the remains of Tyler's tent, creating a small sled to drag Rex. He wasn't a light dog, easily 80 pounds, but adrenaline and desperation can do amazing things. I strapped him in, murmuring soothing words. He whimpered softly but didn't fight me. Blood occasionally seeped through the gauze. I set off toward where I believed the nearest trailhead was, guided by memory and the sun's position. The forest seemed to warp around me, as if every step took me deeper rather than out. Time felt strange, too. I'd walk for what felt like hours, only to glance up and see the sun barely moved. Then I'd blink, and it would be lower in the sky than it should have been, as if minutes had become hours. I can't say how long I walked that first stretch. All I know is that my throat was parched, my legs ached, and Rex's breathing grew more labored. At some point, I paused to rest. The forest had become eerily silent again. I looked at my watch, still stuck at 3:33 a.m. The day's light was dimmer now, leaning towards dusk. I had to fight rising panic. We were losing daylight, and I had no shelter, limited supplies. I forced myself to think logically. Even if we had to endure another night, I could try to start a fire. Then I thought of that twisted, color-changing flame, the sense of being watched. A raw fear spread in my chest. I heard a rustle to my left. My heart hammered. I raised my knife. A figure moved through the undergrowth. Tall, human-shaped, wearing Tyler's face. It stared at me with wide eyes, but the expression was blank, the mouth hanging slack. Another flicker of movement. Then it was gone, as though it melted into the shadows. My mouth went dry. I considered fleeing, but how far could I go dragging Rex behind me? And if that thing wanted to attack, it could have done so already. When it didn't appear again, I took a shaky breath and resumed walking. The terrain dipped downhill. Trees closed in tighter. I tried to keep the red glow of the setting sun in front of me, hoping that would direct me westward, eventually leading to a park boundary. My body ached, sweat mixing with fear. Every root and stone threatened to trip me. I thought I heard voices at times, my own voice, or Tyler's laughter echoing. I had to fight to stay coherent. As night fell, the temperature dropped. Rex was panting softly, eyes partially glazed. I repeatedly called his name and patted his head to keep him conscious. "Stay with me, buddy," I murmured. "We're almost out of here." Even if it was a lie, I needed to cling to some hope. Then, in the fading light, I spotted a sign in the distance. Stumbling forward, I realized it was a wooden marker, the kind used for trail boundaries. Relief nearly broke me. I dragged Rex forward, seeing the words "parking" and "trailhead" with an arrow. We were close. We might make it. A muffled voice startled me. "Hey there!" I whirled around to see a man in a brown uniform standing a dozen yards away. A Department of Natural Resources patch was visible on his shoulder. A beam of light from his flashlight cut through the gloom. I squinted, disbelief ripping through me. Was it truly a ranger? He wore a wide-brimmed hat. "Are you okay?" he called, stepping closer. He saw Rex, eyes widening. Holy, what happened? Tears stung my eyes. "My friend, Tyler, he lost it. We were attacked by something. I stabbed him. Oh God." My words tumbled out, half coherent. The ranger advanced cautiously, shining the light on Rex's bloody bandages. "Let's get your dog some help," he said, voice steady. "My truck's back at the trailhead. Are you able to walk?" I nodded, so choked up with relief I almost collapsed. "Yes, thank you," I managed. "We have to. Tyler's body is back there." I gestured behind me, somewhere deeper in the forest. The ranger frowned. "We'll see to that. Let's get you out first." He led me through a winding path I hadn't seen before. After only a short walk, we broke into a clearing. My heart soared, seeing the silhouette of a pickup truck. The ranger pointed to the passenger side. "Hop in. We'll get your dog in the back seat. Careful now." I gently placed Rex in the back seat. He whimpered. The ranger rummaged for a moment, then handed me a small blanket to put over Rex. My mind was reeling, trying to process the events. Tyler dead. That horrifying creature, the illusions. I couldn't stop the tears. I buckled myself into the passenger seat, leaning my head back, exhaustion taking over. The driver's door opened and the ranger climbed in. Another figure followed, sliding into the middle seat, a man wearing a wide grin. My stomach lurched. It was Tyler. He turned to me, smiling too long, blinking too little. The ranger didn't react. Instead, he shut the door and started the engine. My pulse hammered in my ears and I grabbed for the door handle, but the lock clicked into place. What is this?" I croaked, voice trembling. Tyler stared, his grin never wavering. The ranger pulled away, headlights illuminating a narrow dirt road. A silence filled the cab, thick as tar. I turned to look at Rex, who was unconscious on the seat, chest moving shallowly. I couldn't abandon him. I had to think. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe I was in shock, seeing illusions. Or maybe this was something else altogether. Tyler, and it was Tyler's body, or at least a perfect replica, just kept smiling. Then he said, in a hollow, almost metallic voice, "Got turned around, didn't you?" The ranger nodded in agreement, eyes fixed on the road ahead. My blood turned cold. The world outside the windows was pitch black, as if the truck was driving through an endless void. No headlights seemed to pierce that darkness. I couldn't form words. My mind screamed at me to do something, but I was pinned by fear. Tyler's eyes locked onto mine, and a flicker of movement passed over his face, like a ripple, revealing a glimpse of pale, featureless flesh underneath. And then it was back to his familiar features, a mocking parody of my friend. A wave of dizziness overtook me. I forced myself to blink. My ears rang. The edges of my vision blurred. The last thing I recall was the ranger's voice, calm and low, saying, "You got real lost out there, buddy. But don't worry, we'll get you where you need to go." Then darkness swallowed me. I must have blacked out. When I came to, I was lying on my side in a ditch next to a lonely highway, miles from the forest. My arm was stiff. Dried blood caked around the bite marks Tyler had left. Rex was beside me, still breathing. A single passing car screeched to a halt, its driver jumping out to check on us. Her name was Sharon, I learned later, and she was on her way to a store in the nearest town. She helped me get Rex into her car and raced us to a veterinary clinic. I was delirious with relief and confusion. She kept asking what happened, and all I could do was mutter about being lost in the woods. Rex was stabilized. The vet said he might have permanent nerve damage, but he would survive. As for me, The local hospital treated my wounds and shock, but no one could piece together exactly how I'd ended up on that roadside. The doctors assumed Tyler was a figment of my disoriented state, perhaps a ranger who'd found me but didn't want to get involved. My story didn't make sense to them. Hell, it didn't make sense to me. I tried explaining about the body I left in the forest, but the authorities found no trace of it. They did a search around the area where Sharon said she picked me up, but it was nowhere near any direct trail from the spot we'd originally camped. The official record concluded that Tyler McCabe was simply a missing person. Weeks later, I got a phone call from someone in the DNR who said they'd found footprints and some scattered gear, but nothing conclusive. They never found Tyler's remains or any sign of a struggle. And so, here I am, writing this down in the small hours of the night, my bandaged arm throbbing and my mind looping over the horrors I witnessed. Rex sleeps at my feet, letting out the occasional whimper as if caught in a nightmare. I still can't completely believe what happened. Some nights, I dream about the forest. In the dreams, I see that twisted deer, or I see Tyler, or I see something wearing my own face, grinning at me from behind a tree. I'm trying to move on, but then I remember the last time I glanced at my watch. It's still stuck on 3:33 a.m. no matter what I do. Even if I let it sit for days, replaced the battery, it never budges. And in the background of my mind, something gnaws at me. Maybe I never really left that forest. Maybe part of me is still out there, trapped in a loop of terror. Or maybe I'm living in another version of reality, one shaped by that creature. Sometimes I wonder if that ranger and the Tyler look-alike were part of my delirium. But then I recall how vividly I felt the seat of that truck, the hum of its engine, the suffocating darkness beyond its windows. I remember that moment of waking in the ditch, how real the asphalt felt beneath my palms. It all blends together in a swirl of confusion, making me question every memory, every step. A few days ago, at a gas station near the outskirts of Yellow River State Forest, I thought I saw a missing persons flyer pinned to a corkboard. It had a grainy photo of Tyler from an old ID. According to the flyer, Tyler had gone missing in 1987, 36 years ago. That's impossible. Tyler was only 34 now, and I'd known him since high school in the late 2000s. Yet, there it was, plain as day. I rubbed my eyes, stared at it again. My chest turned cold. A part of me wanted to rip it off the board and tear it apart, but I was too paralyzed by dread to do anything except stagger away. I don't know what to make of this. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe my mind is fractured, playing tricks on me. Or maybe time and reality truly bent in that forest, shaped by something more ancient and malevolent than I can comprehend. All I know for sure is that what happened in Yellow River State Forest was real enough to leave me with scars and nightmares. Real enough to leave Tyler missing from my life. Rex recovers day by day, and I try to do the same. I still jolt at shadows and double-take when I see a tall figure standing too still, or a reflection in a window that doesn't match my movements. I keep searching the news for any mention of a mysterious death or body found in the forest, but there's nothing. Sometimes I consider telling the authorities the full story, but I know they'll dismiss me as delusional, traumatized. Perhaps they're right. Every so often, late at night, I think I hear scratching at my front door, or a faint voice beyond the window. I cling to Rex's presence for comfort, but he's just as jittery as I am. In those moments, I remember the weight of the knife in my hand, the sickening spray of blood, and the eyes of my best friend, no longer his own. I wonder if that invisible shape that crawled out of him found another host, some unsuspecting soul who thought they could roam the peaceful Iowa woods without fear. I don't think I'll ever set foot in Yellow River State Forest again. Perhaps that's cowardly. maybe I owe it to Tyler to go back, to look for him or his remains. But then I recall the shapes in the dark, the voices that sounded like my own, and the deer's hide peeled back without a single drop of blood. Fear overrides guilt. So I stay away. If you're reading this, I ask just one thing. If you ever venture into the backcountry of Yellow River State Forest, be careful. Pay attention to your surroundings. If your phone dies, if your map stops making sense, if you hear voices that shouldn't be there, turn around. You might be lucky enough to escape, or you might lose yourself like Tyler did, or like I almost did. Because something out there is hungry for more than just your skin. It wants your mind, your memories, your essence. I still don't know if my friend was possessed by that creature or if Tyler was replaced entirely at some point. My last living memory of him is that haunted look before he gave in and carved into Rex. The rest was a shell, a puppet for something monstrous. In nightmares, I see his face twisted with that endless grin, asking me where I plan to run, how I plan to keep outrunning it, or how I plan to outrun time itself. And somewhere in the background an echo repeats over and over, "You're already dead, you just don't know it yet." God help me, sometimes I believe it.